Okay, today we will be going through the last part of the syllabus, which says important international institutions, fora, and generally it uses the word their structure and mandate. So I would suggest that you look at the questions as I have told you and I have shown you also for previous years. As far as possible, we'll look at questions from previous years today as well. And B, just understand, as I had explained to you in the class, that a lot of organizations we have already covered when we were in different regions of the world. Two, a lot of organizations are covered in the current affairs cycle. For example, monthly current affairs or through the programs like PT 365 and Mains 365. So in the last class, our larger purpose is understanding so that you can cover the organization, because there are a lot of organization and you would have to, as I would show you on the slides, you would have to keep an eye on the newspaper for this section. All right. So please remember these three things, what we have already discussed. Now in today's class, when we talk about international organizations, we are talking about entities and issues which go beyond the boundary of any particular country. So thereby we can basically think of the issues which international organizations deal with to be transnational issues. All right. When we say transnational, what we mean is issues or process going beyond the boundaries of a single country or beyond the purview of a single country. So organizations by definition are transnational actors. All right, they are transnational actors. They deal with issues which go beyond but affect nation states. They deal with issues which go beyond the boundary of a particular nation state. So that's why transnational actors. Now when we had started our classes, we had said that a foreign policy is a country's external policy which is necessarily operating in an external setting. Now what is this external setting? So we had said that this external setting, international system as we can call it, comprises of other sovereign states. So that's why we looked at bilateral relations, India with other sovereign states. Then this international system also comprises of non-state actors, actors who are not state entities. All right. And the third is the presence of international organizations. So international organizations are also third important entity in this international system. So if foreign policy is pursuing your national interest, much of your national interest or areas of your interest which you define under your national interest may be affected by international opinion, international understanding, and may have aspects which are international. So that's where you need to defend your interests plus contribute to the development of rules globally so that you can develop in a conducive external atmosphere. So that is what a foreign policy is doing. Now organizations, if you look at organizations, the word organization, it simply is a characteristic of being organized. All right. So you can be an organized individual with organizational skills. Organization, when you go into discipline, you study about organization in management, you study about organization in psychology, you study about organization in sociology, you study about organization in public administration, political science, and also international relations. So organization may have a simple meaning and in different subjects and different contexts may have a special meaning. So we can simply say an organization is nothing but a group of actors coming together on a common platform in pursuit of common objectives. All right. So that is what an organization is. Simply a gathering, a grouping of countries coming on a common platform for pursuing a common objective. This is basically what organization in simplest terms would be. So when we say international organization, the simple understanding is international organizations are platforms where various actors converge in pursuit of certain common objectives. So international organization brings together, depending on who its members are, brings together different actors for doing what? For pursuing certain common objectives. All right, and these common objectives can be either solving a problem or taking advantage of an opportunity. And one other aspect can be regulating the behavior of states in different areas like economy, like trade, all right, like security, right? So that is what happens at international level. So international organizations promote cooperation, ensure progress in any particular area where they are working, add to the development of rules, and thereby also add to the idea of a rules based order. All right, so this is what international organizations may be doing, but many a times, since there is an expectation of a very short term result, most of us are disappointed with international organizations. So if we want quick results, they may not be visible in case of international negotiations. But you understand that conduct of countries is based on certain rules, and these rules have been either developed bilaterally or multilaterally. So another way of understanding organization is by looking at them as part of multilateral architecture of global governance. All right, multilateral architecture of global governance. We understand that multilateralism means involvement of 3 or more countries in pursuit of any objective. So whenever there is a process, negotiation, agreement, institution which has 3 or more countries, we generally refer to them as multilateral institutions, multilateral organizations, multilateral agreements. And India, for example, wants multilateralism to strengthen. All right, so that's something that is from India's foreign policy perspective. India would like multilateralism to strengthen. All right, now in this, international organizations play an important role, right, in shaping the expectation as well as shaping the outcomes, right? International organizations are playing important role in shaping the expectations and shaping the outcomes when it comes to a global multilateral order of or architecture of governance. All right, so for these kinds of things, rules, institutions, actors, in a systematic way we use the term global order. All right, now we understand that when we apply the principle of sovereignty at the external level, it has a greater value, because in the international system 2 sovereigns are formally equal. All right, so for example, 2 countries are member of an organization, they are equal members. But in practice, going beyond the formal, we also understand that not all countries in the world are equal. All right, there are differences, divergences on issues, but also in attributes. For example, territory, size of population, size of economy, status of economy. So we understand that there is a formal aspect to understanding everything, and there is an informal aspect to it also. So for example, an international organization plays an important role, or international organizations are playing an important role in shaping of a global multilateral order. They are an important part of it. They shape the expectations, they shape the outcomes. They provide a platform for diplomacy to take place, countries to negotiate rules. And when these rules are commonly agreed upon, we understand that this is the conception of rules-based order. But who shapes the international organization? Remember, international organizations may have a legal personality, but they don't have anything independent of its members. All right, so any organization, its failures or its successes are always the failure and successes of its members. Formally, all members are equal, but informally we understand that some members may be more capable, so they have more or greater responsibility. All right, either to ensure success or to prevent failure. Some countries have greater responsibility, but formally we treat everyone as equal. So these are the principles, right? Principles like sovereign equality through which international organizations work. Now, what kind of organizations are we talking about? So when we talk about exam or generally international relations, we are mainly focusing on what we call intergovernmental organizations. All right, intergovernmental organizations. All right, or international governmental organization. That would be also a similar term. Intergovernmental or international governmental organization. What does it mean? It simply means that these are organizations whose primary members and thereby the primary decision makers and also the primary contributors to its budget are sovereign states represented by their governments. All right, that's why international governmental organizations or intergovernmental organizations. All right, so primarily why we talk about them, because most of the decision making in very effective ways has remained in the hands of states. Now, we have been debating whether technology is changing it, whether globalization is changing it, but that remains a debate. To a large extent, states still hold the keys to decision making and thereby outcomes in international relations, and their interests thereby become important, right? But what international organizations do is they create certainly a formal structure based on formal rules, based on formal expectation of conducts from states. All right. So then when we look at intergovernmental organizations, we have many examples. For example, United Nations would be the best example of traditional multilateralism. It is the best example of what we call the post-Second World War order, which we still think is continuing, all right, in terms of institutions. All right. And one of the characteristics of United Nations is that it has a universal and thereby a large membership. United Nations has 193 members. And thereby what has happened is different countries, different groupings, depending on their interests, have their own grievances against this traditional multilateralism, meaning against traditional institutions which formed the post-Second World War global order, like the UN, like the IMF, like the World Bank. Right? So these are traditional multilateral institutions defined or identified mainly by large membership, all right, and their existence after the Second World War. And another characteristic that you will see, old multilateralism has been guided and shaped by Western countries. So we always have an accusation of Eurocentric bias or West-centric bias when it comes to these institutions, World Bank, IMF, right, or United Nations, right? So that is something that is another way of criticizing these organizations, that some states or other states are not happy with these institutions. Then what we also see is that while such organizations were needed maybe in the aftermath of the Second World War to promote cooperation, thereby prevent conflict, thereby probably prevent Third World War. But the world has become much more complex. For example, immediately after Second World War, the world order was characterized by the condition of bipolarity, meaning distribution of powers and abilities disproportionately into two poles, right? One Soviet-led Eastern Pole, two US-led Western Pole, right? So this would create a strain on any international organization because by definition it would have diverse sets of members, right? So that to some extent affected the working of these organizations, the Cold War rivalries, great power rivalries. And in that period, you'd also see a difference emerging between what has been variously called Third World, all right, and now we use the term Global South, meaning countries which were not economically advanced, which were newly independent countries, countries which had seen colonialism and imperialism, right? So countries which were not part of what we call advanced industrial societies, mainly European countries and North American countries, and to some extent in Asia, Japan, and then Australia. So this is an economic differentiation, development differentiation mainly. So you will see that your priorities are different when you are rich and when you are poor or you are middle class. So understanding things, public policy specifically, in interest terms becomes objective and easier. I'm not saying that is the only way. But once you start understanding things in terms of interest, in international relations or in public policy domestically, things would become easier. So then what you see is that as the Cold War ends, These organizations are facing problems, strains. After the Cold War, end of Cold War, what we say is there is a post-Cold War era, which is characterized to a certain extent by different terms. So initial part of it is celebrated in America by certain scholars when they call it the unipolar moment. All right, which is now there is only one hegemon, one great power, that is United States. West has won. All right. And Francis Fukuyama and people like him, scholars like him, at that point in time talking about end of history. This is larger political science debate. Now, what you see is what kind of conflicts, what kind of challenges is the world facing, which any international organization should strive to address. So after the end of Cold War, what we see is conflicts between states are not so much evident, but conflicts within states, within different groups, ethnic crisis in different countries created conflict. So you will see after the end of the Cold War, you have the Balkans crisis in Europe, in certain part of Europe. All right. So ethnic conflict, right? And different parts of the world have their own different conflicts. So conflict has not ended. The nature of conflict has transformed to a certain degree. Non-state actors, terrorism are suddenly emerging as another security threat, which earlier were not taken into consideration so much. So non-state actors as security threat. So nature of security threat itself is changing, right? So interstate conflict can be one reason of conflict. Intrastate conflict, ethnic conflicts, insurgencies can be another reason of conflict. And then there may be conflicts which is between state and non-state actors, all right, or transnational non-state actors like terrorist groups. So international organizations now are facing newer kinds of issues even in traditional areas of focus like security. But development challenges, economic challenges are there. The north-south disparity continues. The term South-South itself emerges in the late 1980s. There is a South-South Commission which is established by the UN, and Dr. Manmohan Singh was one of its chairs. All right, our finance minister and later prime minister. So South-South, meaning the issues, economic issues, development issues of countries which are variously called developing countries, least developed countries, are still in contention for recognition. All right. So then this dissatisfaction also continues. Then what you will see is at the turn of the 21st century, since much has changed, we see that now multilateralism may be taking another form, which is now countries trying to come together in cohesive, interest-based, like-minded groups, right? Even to propel global or transnational issues. So that's where you will see 1999, the birth of G20, all right? And then you can have alphabet soup of these organizations. So you have in 2006, the BRICS coming up, all right? Brazil, Russia, India, China initially. And in 2010, South Africa joins 2010-11, so BRICS, right? And then you have many such alphabet soup-like formations, which we can broadly call coalition of the like-minded, all right? So multilateralism, we can say, is now becoming small, right? There is a search for cohesion. There is a dissatisfaction with large and traditional post-Second World War institutions. So these issues I grew up studying, and these issues are still relevant. They are being debated in a new context, right? So now if you see that the limitations of any organization can be explained by relations between its important members. For example, if the UN has been limited use or influence in the Ukraine crisis, it is precisely because on two sides of the equation stand two of the most important, or certainly among the most important members, powerful members of the United Nations, Russia and the United States. All right. So polarization is increasing. Bipolar order of the post-Second World War period was one form of polarization, where bipolarity existed. Polarity is a reference to distribution of power, capabilities in the system. Not everyone has same degree of power in the system, but every state eventually wants to become powerful. Powerful to do what? To defend national interest. What is the primary national interest? Primary national interest is survival, security. All right. And then of course, your economic interests are there, your status related interests are there, right? So when this is happening, you understand states may be more prone to focus on their interests rather than necessarily a long-term larger cooperation. All right. So this tension is always there between the imperatives of international organizations and the particular interests of its members. So this is understanding. Even in bureaucracy, there are rules, but you would have to go beyond rules. All right. If you have to be successful, you have to go beyond. I'm not saying breaking the rules, but you cannot reply to everyone. This is the rule. This is what is to be done. आपका काम नहीं हो सकता. This is not what has to be there. So effort has to be there. So now I would say we can criticize the bureaucracy. Bureaucracy has much to be criticized for, because A, we always want change for betterment, and B, any institution which exists would have its pitfalls. But we can understand domestically, no bureaucracy has been deemed to be a worse condition than a, let's say, imperfect bureaucracy. So similarly understand that the value of international organizations is precisely in their existence. All right. A world without rules is not a proposition that many countries want. So they would always choose a world with imperfect rules. And the rule making is a continuous process. So it means that rules also need to evolve. Institutions also need to evolve. So in this way, we can summarize international cooperation, international organizations, and all that is happening around us. Now you see, we are talking about a post-Cold War order. All right. For the longest time, we talked about post-Cold War order. Now suddenly, we are talking about post-COVID-19 world order. All right. So what kind of world order does India seek? India, of course, seeks a just, rules-based, transparent, and participatory global order, where the voices of global south are represented. But in very jargon terms, what kind of world order does India want? India wants a world order which is based on multilateralism. All right. Now, there can be two ideas about multilateralism. One, what happens to older institutions? So India's view is older institutions should reform. All right. To rise to the current and complex challenges, to be relevant. And second, if this does not happen, the pragmatic understanding is, and world over the countries are doing it, they are forming newer institutions. BRICS is an example of it. BRICS created, for example, New Development Bank. All right. Now, New Development Bank is a bank which is going to finance development. This work was traditionally done by World Bank. All right. So, newer institutions would come up. So, this is something that is going to happen. Then there would be coalition of the like-minded. Quad, for example, can be best described as coalition of the like-minded. 4 countries coming together. What are they doing? They are promoting common interest in collective security. Collective security defined in terms of principles of UN Charter. All right. So that's why you will see HADR, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief. All right. These kinds of areas, cyber security, these kinds of areas are now being explored in terms of cooperation by Quad countries. Right. Coalition of like-minded. IPEF similarly signifies the search for geoeconomics, all right, which is affected by geopolitics. Who will trade with whom, all right, and then what kind of rules would apply? That is something that is happening at IPEF, all right. So issue-based smaller groupings would keep on coming. Then regional trade agreements, for example, RCEP. If WTO does not make progress, RCEP would happen, all right. So that is something that is always happening. Regionalization of global politics is a debate. More regional organizations would be formed. More regional trade would happen. All right. Larger institutions would become obsolete. So these are debates which are going on. But these are the features which are visible. All right. And in that context, also remember that now multilateralism may be taking form or taking better shape in the form of what is called minilaterals. All right. Minilaterals is nothing but a small gathering of countries, right? So all these BRICS or Quad, all right, they can be called minilaterals. All these trilaterals, India, Australia, France, or the I2U2, they all can be called multilateral. So that there is nothing grand conceptually about these things. They have evolved as times have evolved, right? So that is what multilateralism means. So intergovernmental organization. Now the second category of organizations would be what we call international non-governmental organizations, INGOs, all right, INGOs. So you see, this has also been an evolving debate, that what is the role of non-state actors in international relations. So that's why some people use the term global politics. Some people use the term international politics. So when we say global politics, it means that that term presupposes the inclusion of state as well as non-state actors in important international processes. Okay? So this is also an academic debate, right? Which term is better? Because international relations supposes relations between nations as the most important attribute of this subject, right? Global politics sometimes is used as a broader term. So now what you will see is that this debate has taking shape since the beginning of 20th century, right? It gathered momentum after Second World War, and it became a sort of area of focus in the post-Cold War period, the 1990s, all right? So then people started talking about international civil society. So by definition, what we are talking about is such organizations whose primary participants are non-governmental actors, or in other words, civil society actors. So such organizations operating internationally have been given the name INGOs. All right. So, and we generally consider them as part of what some scholars refer to as international civil society. Right. So what kind of INGOs? I had shown you a question, Amnesty International. So Amnesty International works in one issue area, which is human rights generally. Particularly, it is known for advocacy of the rights of the prisoners, all right, rights of under trials, rights of political prisoners, and it operates through a network of offices, or locally the civil society groups getting associated with Amnesty International. So it has presence all across the globe. It has membership all across the globe. Its operations are all across the globe. It plays an important role in advocacy. And the aim is to shape opinions, ultimately shape policies. And it happens also. All right. For example, the principles that Amnesty International advocates, for example, abolition of the death penalty, is a principle that many countries now are adopting. So we can say that in progress of the international community, international non-governmental organizations also play a role. They are defined by primarily the membership comprising of non-governmental actors or civil society actors. They work generally in a particular issue area of development, human development. All right. So there can be organizations which are dedicated to development. For example, Oxfam keeps on issuing reports. All right. It is part of international civil society. Right. Human Rights Watch is again a civil society group which issues reports on human rights conditions in various countries. Right. So this is basically what these organizations are doing. They are not primary decision makers, but we can say that they shape decisions by shaping opinions, by articulating the voice of the voiceless at times. All right. So you have various such organizations. You have Medicine Sans Frontiers or Doctor Without Borders. These are doctors who are working in conflict situations. Right. So these are INGOs, or Greenpeace, working in the area of environment protection. All right. Putting pressure on the government to change policies. Right. So that is what you will see these groups do. Now, they may be in conflict with the state, contention with the state on some matters, it happens. Or they may cooperate with states, it also happens. All right. And the third category of organizations now are, or may be called, based on their membership simply, hybrid international organizations. Right. And this is simply an effort to now bring together close to or more than 1,000 international organizations in some categories. So hybrid international organizations simply are organizations where the membership derives from governments, but also private sector, industry, but also other parts of private sector, for example, academia. All right. So these organizations generally work in areas which are technical, work in areas where technology is involved. All right. And this is not a technical definition. This is generally an understanding that I am trying to give you. Right. So that's why you will see one of the first international organizations which was created today is known as ITU. All right. International Telecommunications Union. It was formed as International Telegraphic Union. All right. And then you have UPU, Universal Postal Union. Right. So by nature, you see the work involved is transnational. All right. Communication, telecommunications, telegraphic communication, internet. So this is going beyond boundaries. This is connecting people beyond boundaries, institutions beyond boundaries. Now, one part, regulation always is in the hand of the government, security, sovereignty issues, always in the hand of government. So government is necessarily a stakeholder in these areas. Technology incubation and development happens in the private sector, happens in the university, academia. So of course, that has to be an important part of deliberations on these kinds of issues. And then you will also see operators, for example, telecom operators are also in the private sector, right? So similarly, postal handling and other forms of communication also may have involvement of these actors. So that's why in organizations like ITU or UPU, you have participation of governments, private sector, industry, academia, right? Similarly, you have various other groupings where such form of cooperation is required. For example, Red Cross. Red Cross is hybrid because its primary work derives from volunteerism, all right, civil society engagement, but it cannot work without the cooperation of the government. So largely it works under what we call humanitarian laws, the umbrella of humanitarian laws, or set of Geneva laws, as we say, all right, which basically talk about rights of prisoners of war, right, what should be the conduct towards prisoners of wars. So it's a complex set of rules that exist in different areas, and depending upon that, you can find various organizations in this form. Then there is ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization. Now, if you look at civil aviation, of course, the security sovereignty over the airspace is a sovereign function. So governments would be involved. बट इफ यू सी डेवलपमेंट ऑफ टेक्नोलॉजी, जैसे इंडिया ने साइन किया अभी बोइंग के साथ, एयरबस के साथ हवाई जहाज बनाने का कॉन्ट्रैक्ट है ना, एयर इंडिया के लिए. सो कौन बनाएगा? बोइंग, एयरबस. व्हाट आर दीज आर इंडस्ट्री एक्टर्स, दीज आर प्राइवेट सेक्टर एक्टर्स. एंड देन you have operators. So you will see that many countries have national carriers or government operated airlines, but in this sector you have a lot of private players. So that's why ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, would be also an example of a hybrid organization. And this classification is only in terms of membership. So this is something that you needed to keep in mind at the very outset. Now in one line, what kind of global order does India want? India wants a just global order. All right. India wants a multilateral order. India wants a multipolar order. And India thereby wants a rules-based global order. All right. So this is what basically our broadest objectives in our international multilateral negotiations would be. All right. Achieving a global order which is based on multilateralism, multipolarity. It is a rules-based order and it is just order, right? So that's something which will help you, because in the examination, so that you don't just digress from issues, the lens is very clear. India, right? Now we will talk about the UN, but before that I said that, look at the questions. But before that, look at the syllabus also. Syllabus says structure and mandate. So when you plan to study any organization, you should keep in mind these two words, structure and mandate. Its structure simply means how many members are there, right? When was it formed? Where is the headquarter? What is the decision making process? Who are the important decision makers? This is what is called structure. And mandate is what is the organization doing? What are its principles? And if you look at then questions, all the questions that UPSC asks is a combination of these two, structure and mandate, plus in some questions, India-centric perspective. And all these questions can be prepared and answered through being up to date with current affairs. All right. So keeping that in mind, let's simply look at the UN, right? UN would serve as an example of all that we have discussed today. So when we discuss UN, what we'll do is we'll discuss its structure. All right. Then, of course, when we are discussing its structure, discussing its mandate is not terribly complex. So we generally would refer to, when we are talking about the mandate of UN, we are referring to the UN Charter, right? Promoting, upholding the principles of UN Charter. That's the mandate of the UN, right? In terms of functional areas, it would translate into promotion of global peace and security, promotion of cooperation in global development, promotion in cooperation in environmental protection, promotion of cooperation in upholding human rights. So United Nations in a sense has no single focus. Its focus has multiple variables. All right. So in functional terms, it has various works. So that's why it is the best example of understanding how multilateralism has been shaped and how multilateralism works, right? So as I said, when we are talking about any organization, what we do is we look at the structure and the mandate. So let's look at the UN. And this is where some overlap with world history comes into play. If you, for example, if you have a complaint, if you have a complaining nature, you will say that I have not studied world history, how would I understand this? But if you have a solution-centered approach, you will realize that I already told you that if you read the NCERT called Contemporary World Politics, much would make sense. It would not happen in one day, but eventually this is what you have to learn. No matter what you think you have to learn, but that is something that you have to learn. So let's go back to the beginning of 20th century. The beginning of 20th century is considered to be the birth of the academic discipline of international relations. All right. So we see the birth of international relations being taught as a subject for the first time in the 20th century in the universities of UK. All right. And then Europe and then United States. So that's why you will see the approach of this discipline is West-centric. The terminology, best material, theoretical development is happening in English. Right. So that's something that has been there, and that gives you a larger perspective of history, how knowledge is constructed and how there is no end of learning. हमेशा सीखना पड़ेगा आपको if your purpose is to acquire knowledge. All right. So now you see the primary question has been deriving from the experience of Europe, the question of war, right? Because Europe has seen various wars. All right, Europe emerged from its dark ages. Then Europe saw 100 years war, 30 years war, Crimean war. All right, and if you go back, come to the early part of 20th century, in 1914, Europe sees another conflict, which this time is called the World War, the First World War. So this is an important question. Now understand, the question of war is again a multivariate question. What are the reasons of war? So some people would explain it in theory in terms of human nature, that human nature is warlike. Some people would explain it in the context of not human nature. They would say human nature is cooperative, but it is the problem of this system. All right. Some people would say it is the problem of rules. So we generally say rules and institutions is the concern mainly of the liberals. Some people would say that it is rooted in the structure of the international system, which is anarchical. Anarchical simply means that there is a lack of a world government. So any sovereign state theoretically means that there is nobody who can order that sovereign state. All right. So these are various explanations, and that is the subject matter of IR as a discipline primarily. Right. So now you see Europe's practices had already indicated what kinds of cooperation is possible. So you would study in world history concert of Europe. All right. So Europe has seen alliance system, alliance making, wars between alliances, and Europe then started to move towards what theoretically is called the balance of power. All right, parity between different powers so that war doesn't break out in the 19th century. And Europe also then is witnessing the rise of institutions like permanent court of arbitration. So permanent court of arbitration was primarily to provide states peaceful means of resolving their disputes. All right, that is the origin of PCA, permanent court of arbitration. So permanent courts of arbitration's origins and membership is traced to two conventions, Hague Convention of 1899 and Hague Convention of 1907. All right. So permanent court of arbitration still exists, and it primarily facilitates alternative forms of dispute resolution, arbitration, mediation, reconciliation, these kinds of practices. Right. So that is another indicator of what is going to come. But you see, it all is in nascent stage. Technology is also evolving, means of travel have become faster, global trade is also ascending, so these issues are also there, right? And you see that the breaking of the First World War in 1914, in world history you will study why did it break out, what were the factors, who is responsible, right? What is the trigger event, the murder of Archduke Ferdinand or Germany's policies or other countries. This is what you study in history. Now for us in international relation, it simply becomes a milestone that it has already happened, you have a knowledge of it, let's just analyze. So you see that this war is a destructive war. For example, it is known not only for use of certain new categories of weapons like chemical weapons, but chemical weapons, use of chemical weapons like mustard gas or sarin in most recent times has a disadvantage, which is what its use is going to be indiscriminate in terms of its effects. So in First World War, you have interesting events, interesting and unfortunate events, like the Germans using nerve gas and the wind changing the direction. So that's why you will see there is an early on development of convention on chemical weapons. All right. So which basically is modernized in the 1990s, but this also conflict also is generating some form of expectation of rules. Right. Now you understand that this war is also known for what is called trench warfare. All right. Big lines are being dug by countries as their defensive mechanism, defensive lines. And nobody is making progress. People are being killed. So it is known for destruction. It is known for economic losses. So obviously at the end of this war, who won, who lost is an important question, but what happened in terms of learning the lesson is also important. So thereby you will see after the end of the World War, First World War, you have what is collectively called Peace of Paris. Peace of Paris is nothing but a set of deliberations, negotiations between those who won the First World War and those who lost the First World War. All right. And then agreements coming out of them. Right. So you have the Treaty of Versailles, right? Treaty of Lucerne, Treaty of Alsace-Lorraine, all these coming out of this process. So Peace of Paris. So Peace of Paris is an example of international diplomacy. All right. Multiple countries have come together to Paris and are negotiating something. So of course, one of the outcomes would be imposing war reparations on Germany, limiting its army. Right. Those things are there. Punitive measures or in certain sense deterrent measures also. So one part of history of First World War is, did the Peace of Paris in itself contain the seeds of the Second World War in the way Germany was treated? But Peace of Paris also led to creation of certain organizations. One is the International Labour Organization. All right, but it's similar time frame, but slightly different. International Labour Organization, 1919. All right, it still exists. It predates the UN. And Peace of Paris directly led to the formation of another global multilateral institution called the League of Nations. All right, League of Nations. Now the League of Nations for the first time is kind of an assembly of states from around the world, right? Now League of Nations is coming in the aftermath of destruction, conflict, which is World War, hope that we will learn lesson from this, and then some idealism expressed in speeches of people like Woodrow Wilson, the then President of the United States, who famously said, open covenants openly arrived at. All right, that's how international relations should be conducted. Open covenants, open rules, open agreements, openly arrived at, transparency. And his idea was League of Nations, an organization which would steer cooperation, which would ensure conflicts do not break out. If they break out, they also end. But what we see is League of Nations is not remembered for its success. League of Nations is remembered for its failure or limitations. League of Nations, for example, one of the questions in world history could be that League of Nations was responsible for the breakout of the Second World War, or the failure of League of Nations was the reason for the breakout of the First World War. In that answer, one part would be no, it is not the case completely. Conduct of Germany, conduct of Britain, etc., etc. Right? Once you have read a book, this is how you can play. So, League of Nations A is representing idealism in international relation, hope for diplomacy to be the primary recourse to address concerns and issues in international relations, and it also contributes structurally by for the first time creating such a global institution, right? So it is one of the pehli baar hua moments in history, right? So then what you see is gradually that League of Nations imparts certain learning to us also. League of Nations was structurally flawed, formally and informally. Formally, its membership was limited. For example, its work was dominated by ambassadors club or diplomats club involving diplomats of UK, France to a large extent, and to some extent they incorporated accompanying Italy into it. All right. So that's basically one criticism, that it is dominated by some set of interests. Important members either become members late, for example, Soviet Union becomes a late member, or quit the organization. All right. For example, Germany quits the organization. And then its members themselves start violating its principles. For example, Japan's invasion of Manchuria and Italy's invasion of Abyssinia. That's why you study before the Second World War, Abyssinian crisis and Manchurian crisis, and mainly the League of Nations response. So the League of Nations could not rise to the occasion. It may also mean that the members of League of Nations could not rise to the occasion. So it has structural flaws. And United States, for example, never became a member of League of Nations. Why? Because Woodrow Wilson proposed the idea, but the US Congress did not approve the idea. So that's the failure of League of Nations. And the Second World War then breaks out. Now it's another ravaging 5 years or so of conflict. And at the end of the conflict, it is again clear that the Allied have prevailed over the Axis powers. Germany, Japan, Italy in Second World War are Axis powers, and US, UK, France, European powers, India, British India that is, these are Allied powers, right? Canada, Australia, Allied powers. So Allied powers win. Before the end of the Second World War, formal end of the Second World War, the US leads multiple conferences. There is a conference of the Nations United. There is a statement about the Nations United, and from this the term United Nations comes into existence. And the idea is to learn from League of Nations, because League of Nations at least has created a precedent that we need such organizations. They may not be perfect, but we still need them to ensure that conflicts are contained, cooperation is promoted. So United Nations is coming out of the experience of Second World War. So it has a clear imprint of its context. So it is a representative of what we can call post-Second World War order. All right. It's a representative of post-Second World War order. Right. It is emerging out of deliberations where clearly some countries have an upper hand. The Allied powers, of course, are in a dominating position. So thereby you will see that structure of the UN also reflects the post-Second World War realities. All right. So, United Nations is formally created in 1945. So that is the formation year. Some history should be known. 24th October is the UN Day, for example. Now the UN, to start with, had 51 founding members, 51 founding members who founded the United Nations, signed its charter. All right. India there is a question, is India a founding member? Yes, India is a founding member of the United Nations. India is among the 51 founding members of the United Nations. So then this history piece leads to the current affairs piece, which is how many members are there today of the United Nations? Today the United Nations has 193 members. All right, 193 members. And who is the latest to join the United Nations? So South Sudan, joining the UN in 2011, is the latest to join the UN. All right, South Sudan. Right. Now this starts laying the foundation of what we call structure, knowledge regarding the structure of an organization. Now if you see, the primary mandate of the UN is defined by a document which is called UN Charter. So this is my old copy of the UN Charter, right? This is the UN Charter. So it contains the UN Charter plus the statute of ICJ, International Court of Justice, right? So it is like a treaty, your entry form. If you are a member of the UN, you accept to abide by this. These days, we keep on talking about UN principles or principles of UN Charter. So this is the document that we are talking about, right? So then, at the end of the San Francisco conference, this charter is adopted. यही होता है उन conferences में. You negotiate draft of this kind of a document. So promoting the goals, objectives, principles of the charter is the mandate largely of the United Nations, right? And what would be that in specific terms? So UN Charter would aims at upholding global peace and security. So that is one function that the UN should perform, right? Promoting, protecting global peace and security, all right, including threats to peace or breach of peace. Second is acting as a center to harmonize action among nations, all right, in simple terms, to promote cooperation, right, to act as a center of cooperation for these countries coming together. So it means providing platform for diplomacy, negotiations, forming common rules, right? So harmonizing acting as the center for harmonizing the actions of nations, all right? Promoting cooperation for global development. That is another simple objective of the UN, promoting cooperation for global development. And then promoting and upholding universal human rights or respect for universal human rights. That is also another objective of the UN. So mandate generally is not very complex. It is in part principle, and in some case if it is too technical an organization, it would be the specific technical details of that. All right. So this is the mandate contained in the UN Charter. Now you understand that this small document contains the structure of the UN, meaning to start with which organs were there in the UN. It contains what are their functions, powers. It contains provisions regarding election, right? So that's why you understand that any major change in the structure of the UN would require a change in the charter, all right? This charter has to be amended. So for example, if you have been dreaming about India becoming a permanent member of the Security Council, what in effect it would mean is this charter needs to be amended, because this charter currently contains the provision for the structure of membership of Security Council. All right. Now this charter can only be amended by the 2/3 vote of General Assembly, but it should also be supported by the members of the Security Council. All right. So first you require that large vote in the General Assembly. That's why one of the points, why relation with this country, because it may be an influential member of UN, or a particular group of countries may have votes in the UN. All right. So if you want to reform UN, major decisions one of them would be changing the charter, which would require 2/3 vote at the General Assembly and support from the Security Council. All right, unless these two meet, it can't happen. Now, so this is the effect of the charter, right? Now, for a moment, let's just answer some very common questions which come to your mind. For example, what is the difference between an organization and a grouping? All right. So, first of all, as any good teacher in law will teach you, that it is not the title of the document that matters so much. It is always the content. All right. So, one way of understanding the nature of anything is looking at what it actually is. But then you can also, on the basis of generalities which exist, identify patterns. So, we can say that when we are talking about organization, international organization, it has a concrete institutional structure. All right. For example, it would have features like a headquarters, all right, which is a permanent structure. It would have features like a charter, which is a founding document, guiding document, all right. So, these concrete features and regularity would define an organization, right? But when we say grouping, what we are saying is that for the functional purposes, it is also an organization. But if we have to draw a technical difference, we can say that they don't have as organized and institutionalized structure, as concrete and institutionalized structure. For example, G20. Whole year, the newspapers would be talking about G20. You can keep on learning about G20. All right. But you understand that G20 does not have a headquarter. All right. That's why you understand that continuity in the work of G20 is maintained by a system of troika. What is troika? The immediate past president, which is, कौन है immediate past president of G20? Indonesia. Current president, India. Next president. Right? So this would be the troika. And troika ensures continuity of work. Any country which hosts the G20, like many of my friends are now here from their assignment, and they are working in the secretariat of G20. So any country which is hosting the G20 chairs the G20 and also then serves as the secretary, but it does not have a permanent secretary. All right. G20 also does not have a document like a charter or a treaty binding these countries together in a formal arrangement. All right. It may lead to agreements, but it does not have a founding document like a charter. So that's basically how you can very generally understand the difference in terms of presence of a concrete institutional structure, the hallmarks of which would be permanent structures like headquarter, charter, all right, and continuity of work maintained through these permanent structures, right? So that would be the broadest difference, all right. But then you may see that groups may transform into more formal structures, all right. You may see that BRICS, for example, is institutionalizing. So it has institutions like NDB and contingency reserve arrangement, but it does not still have a secretariat. All right. So then the question would never be whether you put it under grouping or organization. That's a question on which there is going to be no academic agreement, because that's a question that is of not much relevance. What is the name? So that's why the first rule and the second rule should be taken together. ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए कि आपको एक चीज बताई आपने दूसरी पे ध्यान दिया, दोनों पे साथ में ध्यान देना. That's the meaning of it. So now let's move forward and let's now look at the structure in terms of what yields questions in the examination. All right. Meaning the bare bones, the skeletal structure of the human. Right. So जैसे if you understand human body, of course at the primary level it is comprised of cells. Within cells also there are organelles, all right. For example, there would be a nucleus, mitochondria, etc. Right. And cells come together to form tissues, tissues come together to form any organ system, all right. So human body is a complex machine. We can say that human body is a complex organization also, right, because to the extent coordination function goes on. Now if you see, the nerve center of this human organization is the brain or the nervous system. Let's say in simple terms, the nervous system. So the nerve system of the UN would be an office like a secretariat. All right, that's why you have secretariat. Not many people appreciate the role of secretariats or those who work behind the scenes, क्योंकि हर किसी को हीरो बनना है. But without this support, any work is not possible. Right? So secretariat would play the role of coordinating, drafting, distributing, communicating. काम चलता है उसी से. Right? Then you would have such structures which would be representative in nature, where the main task is representation and deliberation. So that organ is General Assembly. All right. Then you have an organ which is dedicated to a particular task, security, global peace and security. That organ is the Security Council. Then you have an organ which is primarily entrusted with the responsibility of coordinating efforts for cooperation in areas like science, technology, environment, development, culture, education. All right, mainly areas of development, right, in all its comprehensive aspects. So that organ is Economic and Social Council. All right, and then you have some organs of the UN which were relevant till a certain point, but right now they are not relevant and thereby they are suspended. Such an organ is the Trusteeship Council. All right, and then you have another organ of the UN which we have already talked about. All right, we have already talked about an organ of the UN, if you can recall. Which organ of the UN have we dealt with so far in any of the classes? बड़े दिन बाद आ रहे हो, सब ठीक? बताओ, पहली क्लासेस में तो आते थे, याद नहीं है? ICJ, we talked about ICJ in the context of कुलभूषण जाधव केस. ऑल राइट, तो जो लोग उस क्लास में ध्यान नहीं दे रहे थे, उनका ध्यान आगे की तरफ था, रिजल्ट, आउटकम्स, they would miss. Those who understood that the primary focus should be on the process, what is being said in the class, अपना दिमाग मत लगाओ, would remember, recall that. All right, so ICJ, right? So thereby this is basically the skeletal structure of the United Nations. United Nations comprises of these organs. That's why they are called the primary or principal organs of the UN, principal organs of the United Nations. All right. Now, so let's recount them again. First is General Assembly, right, whose main task is representation. So it is the main universally representative organ of the UN. All right. Why? Because all 193 members are represented in the General Assembly. समझ गए आप? All 193 members are represented in the General Assembly. That's why it is the universal representative body. It's also a deliberative body. Issues are debated, resolutions are passed by General Assembly. So that's why it is a deliberative body. When these resolutions are passed, they are passed on the basis of simple majority. So meaning there is voting. So the functioning of General Assembly is example of what we call sovereign equality, meaning one country, one vote. No matter how strong, powerful you are, you have one vote. So it functions on the basis of sovereign equality. All right. Now the resolutions of the General Assembly, that's basically what we see of the General Assembly mainly, right? So understand, resolutions of General Assembly are not binding in nature at all. All right, they are not binding. So this is one of the primary concerns of many students. ये binding है, ये binding नहीं है. It's a complex question to answer. For each document, it has to be answered in different ways, right? So UN General Assembly resolutions are not binding in nature. So some people are disillusioned because they think that it's all about action. All right. So in life, what you would, a virtue that you would need by necessity to learn is patience. This examination is best place or best phase of your life to develop patience, because this examination will test your patience. All right. This job will also test your patience. So understand that the vote of every member of the UN General Assembly is equal. That's why sovereign equality. That's why the resolutions of General Assembly not being binding may seem to be against democratic principles. All right? But that is how it is. So then what is the value of the General Assembly resolution? So we say, one, they are valuable because they represent the moral voice of the international community. All right? If majority of people have voted, meaning that is their thinking. So it represents the moral voice of the international community. Right? Formally we can say about the relevance of General Assembly resolution. Second, what we can say is, thereby they may act as a pressure tool on the behavior of any country, right? So it may be a persuasive tool. So many people are saying so and so, why don't you change? In that simple terms, right? So it may act, since it is moral opinion of the international community, it may act as an incentive for change. But the word is may, right? And the third thing is, it may contribute to the development or advancement of international law. All right? If you look at any judgments, learned judges quote from various sources. Okay? Sometimes they quote in their judgment from those who have written law books. So that means this is the value. All right, so that's where we can say that it may add to the advancement of development of international law. These are the three values of it. Now, let's understand some functioning of the General Assembly. So, General Assembly's function is primarily divided across its 6 committees. All right, so primarily it has 6 committees which are permanent in nature. And the names of the committee is not very difficult. First committee, second committee, third committee, fourth committee, fifth committee and sixth committee. All right, that is the name. And if you are interested in details, you can still refer to the printed material. The names of the committee is there. So 6 committees, because you see, even in parliament, not all business can be conducted on the floor of the house. So that's why you have the committee system even in the parliament. Right? So if somebody asks you the logic, it's functional in nature. So these 6 committees deliberate on different issues. But the work of the General Assembly is continuous and divided into sessions. So around September, this session of the General Assembly begins. Not around September, but in the month of September. That's why you will see prime ministers, presidents, foreign ministers going and giving speech at the UN every September. Now, there is an agenda for each session. So, work of the General Assembly would be to address the agenda which was decided at the beginning. Right? Now, that means that the work of General Assembly is to continue till the agenda is complete, and the agenda is never complete. That's why the work of previous session gets carried over into next session as well. So, that's why the regularity is. But the session formally is considered to be open in September. So, for example, currently this is the 77th session of the General Assembly, which started in September 2022. Next session, which will start in September 2023, would be the 78th session. All right. So, sessions. Now, each session first elects its president. So, General Assembly's president is elected for the tenure of 1 year. All right. Every session has a new president. So, every session, it would be current affairs. Go and look at it. Right. But from India's perspective now, जब आप international organization पढ़ रहे हैं, क्या इंडिया के perspective से कुछ special है? Yes. So, Vijay Lakshmi Pandit was the first female president of General Assembly, and she was from India. All right. So that's basically what more or less General Assembly is doing. Right. And I showed you a question in the last class. Remember, on the credentials committee. So again I said that once you have learned that A, the United Nations in its core has 6 principal organs. Each of them has this role, this structure. Your basic is done. And then current affairs is where you will find questions and also revision of what you have learned, right? So basically this is what General Assembly does, right? And as I said, for example, its important functions would be not only electing the president, but General Assembly also elects the members of Security Council, non-permanent members. General Assembly also elects the members of Economic and Social Council. And General Assembly also participates along with Security Council in the appointment of the judges of the ICJ as well as the Secretary General. So now you can start seeing that it may sound similar to polity. In polity, you will see president, for example. What is the tenure? Who elects the president? All right. And here again, you find this idea taking shape, right? So that is another work, election work, appointment work, that is the work of General Assembly. Okay. So you understand that primary responsibility of security and peace issues is with the Security Council, right? So now we will go to Security Council, but before that, just understand that one of the first conflicts which broke out after the Second World War and after the formation of the UN was the Korean crisis, all right, where Soviet Union, US were involved on two sides. North Korea supported by Soviet Union, South Korea supported by US, all right, and China was also its own party. So this is the first learning moment of the UN. And what is happening is this: since the Security Council voting is characterized by something called the veto, voting in Security Council and effective action through Security Council suffered. Why? Because either Soviet Union or United States would exercise the veto. So that's why Security Council sometimes becomes dysfunctional. So in that context, in the context of the Korean War in 1950, the General Assembly had passed a resolution called Uniting for Peace Resolution. All right, Uniting for Peace Resolution, which simply stated that in case the Security Council fails to take an action, the General Assembly may take an action. Though not exercised, but it also gives you an idea that General Assembly has the potential to assert itself. All right. So that's basically Uniting for Peace Resolution passed by General Assembly, which states that in case there is a lack of action on part of the Security Council or Security Council fails to take action, General Assembly may take action. Now let's go to the Security Council. All right. Now when we come to the Security Council, what should be very clear to you is that according to the charter, Security Council is entrusted with the function of maintenance of international peace and security. All right. So that's its primary mandate, so to say. अगर आप Security Council को एक organization की तरह देखना चाहो, so its primary mandate under the UN Charter is to uphold global peace and security. All right. Now, this is something that has an inherent lesson from what we learned in history. For example, League of Nations had high nobles, had higher ideals, but no effective instruments or institutions to implement them. All right. So Security Council is premised on the idea that the responsibility of global peace and security should be entrusted in the hands of most important or effective powers of the time, who then can contribute to responding to any conflict situation. That's the logic. All right. And who are the most powerful country at the end of the Second World War? So you will see that the permanent members of the Security Council, which is a feature which comes from the charter. All right. So 5 permanent members are there in the Security Council. And who are these 5? They are United States, United Kingdom, France, Russia, China, all allied powers. All right, including China from Asia, because Japan had occupied Manchuria and China had fought against Japan. All right. So victors of the Second World War. So token representation of China from Asia. And this structure continues till date, right? Now the second thing that you notice is that in order to give it a representative character, because that is also the objective, one is to make it effective, another is to make it accountable. All right? In domestic politics also, public policy also, you will learn about these things. There is the imperative of efficiency, effectiveness, but also that you should be rule bound. All right? That you should cater to values like justice and equality. So you see that on the one hand, किसी भी चीज की आप तारीफ कर सकते हैं, किसी भी चीज को आप उठाएं तो आपका उसका पॉजिटिव देख सकते हैं, right? Apart from negative. So then what you see is that while it represented the reality of that day, and it was structurally a good idea as compared to the case with the League of Nations, it inherently leads to some sort of inequality in representation, democratic deficit within the United Nations. So now representation imperative was to be served by the provision for non-permanent members or members in the non-permanent category. So understand, the Security Council has currently 10 non-permanent members, 10 non-permanent members of the Security Council. All right. But to start with, till 1965, the Security Council had 6 non-permanent members. All right. So in that context, there has been only one change so far, that in 1965, the non-permanent category was expanded to 10. All right. So that's where now you will see the members of Security Council are limited as compared to General Assembly. Total members 15, divided into permanent members, non-permanent members. All right. Primary mandate, as the charter says, to uphold international peace and security. And then the charter details what kinds of actions. All right. So you see, since the mandate of General Assembly is so special, it is also accorded with a special power by the charter, which is what? So it is the only principal organ of the UN which can issue binding resolutions. All right. So the resolutions of Security Council are binding in nature. By what? On what basis? Because that is what has been written in the charter. If you are a member of the UN, you have accepted the charter. So UNSC is mandated by the charter to issue binding resolutions, right? So now, what is it that that the Security Council does? Please understand that Security Council, first of all, the role is to hold regular meetings. So understand, it's a diplomatic platform looking at issues of security, right? So primarily, it's a diplomatic platform which many people forget, all right, because they mix what is diplomatic with what is military, right? Because the nature of the issue is such. So it would be like mixing the functions of one who is an IFS and one who is in the armed forces, right? They need to coordinate, consult, cooperate, but their functions are distinct. So then what you will see is that one is meetings. So in that context, remember that generally the meetings of Security Council takes place in the headquarters of the UN, which is in New York. All right. That is where the meeting takes place. Every member of the Security Council is expected to be present with a representative at all times at the headquarters, so that meeting can take place at any time. All right. So it is ready to meet at any time when there is a requirement. So then the committee itself works primarily through its members who deliberate on issues and they vote on issues. All right. So here is something where veto comes into play. Any substantive action, including, for example, recommendation of sanction, resolution of sanctions, would require a majority of 9 votes. So 9 is the majority in Security Council, but also a non-negative vote on the part of all its permanent members. All right. So on substantive issues, what is required? A majority of 9 plus a non-negative vote on part of any all permanent members. Which means what? Which means कोई परमानेंट मेंबर ना अगर कहेगा तो वो सब्सटैंटिव डिसीजन नहीं हो सकता. All right? So this is called veto power, exercising the veto. All right? It is not formally defined anywhere, it's an informal term, but it simply means that the charter provides the requirement for a non-negative vote on part of all permanent members. That is the special voting right that they have. Right? So it means that when an issue has been discussed, an outcome would be a resolution. A resolution would reflect the opinion of the Security Council and the decision of Security Council. The decision is to be voted. So if there is a majority, even if majority of 14 countries on one side and one country on the other side, but this one country is a permanent member, then that action can't take place. All right? So that's basically exercising the veto. Now understand, abstention is not a negative vote. So it means that veto simply means a permanent member exercising a no vote. All right? A permanent member has to either say a yes or abstain. All right? Even if a permanent member abstains, that's not a negative vote. But if a permanent member votes no, the action cannot take place, substantive action. All right? So procedural issues would require a simple majority. Right? So that's basically substantive action. Right? So that's something that helps you in understanding why we say that Security Council is not representative, why there is a criticism that its decisions reflect the values of a select group of countries, why it is said that it has a West-centric bias. It is because of this. Then if you see, the Security Council is entitled under Article 29 to form its own subsidiary bodies. All right? So Security Council generally has 3 standing committees. All right? 3 standing committees. Right? One is the Committee on Admission of New Members. If a member is coming to the General Assembly, it needs the approval of General Assembly as well as the Security Council. If a member is coming to the UN. All right? So that's one committee. Committee on New Membership. Second committee. The second standing committee that the UN has, or UN Security Council has, is meetings outside headquarters. Committee on meetings outside headquarters. Right? So sometimes the Security Council has conducted meetings outside the headquarters also. These are exceptions. These are few. Right? So these places are initial meeting in London. The first meeting of Security Council was in London. Then it held a meeting in Panama City, in Panama. Then it has also held a meeting in Geneva, Switzerland, and then it also has held a meeting in Nairobi, Kenya. All right? So, Committee on Meetings outside the headquarters. And then there is a Committee on Rules of Procedure. Okay? So, these are 3 standing committees. Then there is a committee to advise the Security Council on military matters. All right? So there is an attached military commission. It comprises of military experts from the member countries to advise the Security Council on military issues, on technical issues, right? So the military commission. Then the Security Council keeps on creating various subsidiary bodies. The most prominent one among them is what can be called, or these generally can be called ad hoc committees, because they are created for particular purpose, all right, and remain in existence till that purpose is served. So these are many. And sanctions committee, UN sanctions committee, is one of the main aspects of this ad hoc committee. So sanctions committee is created to regulate sanctions approved by the UNSC over a country, or in the case of a committee called 1267 committee, all right, or Al-Qaeda, ISIL, Daesh and Taliban sanctions committee. So in that case, 1267 committee simply regulates the sanction over individual members or organizations such as Al-Qaeda, ISIL, which is ISIS, Daesh is its Arabic name, all right, Taliban. So that's a sanctions committee. 1267 committee is a sanctions committee, right? So that these are ad hoc committees which the UN creates, All right. Similarly, you have the counter-terrorism committee, which also is the culmination of developments of 1990s, consolidated in the year 2001. All right. Created for the purpose of coordinating global counter-terrorism efforts. All right. Which in itself is a very complex task, because different countries may have different ways of dealing with terrorism. But in order to create uniformity, uniform understanding, counter-terrorism committee is created. Now, the president of the Security Council is elected for a tenure of 1 month. Not elected, but appointed, because it's a rotational chair. So, every member gets to serve as the president in an alphabetical order. For example, India served as the president in August 2021 and December 2022. So, this is done simply by alphabetical order. So, every month the presidency of Security Council rotates, all right, and countries serve in accordance with alphabetical order. So, this is the Security Council in terms of its structure. Then, as times change, you will see creation of new kinds of institutions. So, there is something called peacekeeping, all right. So, peacekeeping is part of the spectrum of peace building, all right. Peacekeeping is an innovation of the UN. It is not there in the UN Charter, all right. So, peacekeeping operations are mandated by the Security Council, but the General Assembly also has a say in shaping it, primarily mandated by the Security Council because that is its function. And thereby, there is what is called the UN Peace Building Commission. It's an advisory body to both General Assembly and Security Council. UN Peace Building Commission, an advisory body to both General Assembly and Security Council. All right. And then the UN Security Council has also created some quasi-judicial bodies. All right. So, International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia and International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. These are two bodies created to try war criminals or people who were involved in genocide, massacres, right, during conflicts, right. So, these are quasi-judicial bodies which were created by the Security Council, right. International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia, right, 93, 94. So, this is what UN Security Council can do. Structurally, this is basically also reflecting its functions. Now, let's understand its function in terms of how it is supposed to act, right, how it works. This would help you in answering a lot of questions. जो आपके आते हैं आपको खुद से सीखना है. You have to learn yourself. You can't search for shortcut answers कि इंडिया ने अपनी सीट चीन को दे दी, है ना. इसका इंटरटेनमेंट का आंसर हो सकता है, बट इसका आंसर इतना कॉम्प्लेक्स होगा कि आपको ढूंढना पड़ेगा उसका मतलब. ये सीट तश्तरी पे तो आती नहीं है कि हमने उठाई और मिठाई की तरह किसी और को दे दी. दिस इज नॉट पॉसिबल, राइट. एंड कश्मीर के मामले में क्या हुआ, हु इज रिस्पॉन्सिबल, हु इज नॉट रिस्पॉन्सिबल. तो ठीक है, टू द एक्सटेंट हिस्ट्री टीचेस अस टू मेक आवर प्रेजेंट एंड फ्यूचर बेटर, वी शुड लर्न फ्रॉम हिस्ट्री. बट history, to the extent it is used for political justification by any dispensation, I think it's not my task or your task to support one against the other. Our task is to keep ourselves informed. All right. So, if you see, Security Council is supposed to take two kinds of actions. These are called Chapter 6 and Chapter 7 action. है ना. Chapter 6, Chapter 7 किसका? चार्टर का. ठीक है, चलो चैप्टर 6 पे चलते हैं. ठीक है, तो पहले तो ये बताएगा स्ट्रक्चर क्या होगा, इलेक्शन कैसे होगा सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल का, वो चैप्टर 5 तक है. चैप्टर 6 का टाइटल है पैसिफिक सेटलमेंट ऑफ डिस्प्यूट्स. सो चैप्टर 6 एक्शंस कैन बी क्लब्ड अंडर व्हाट कैन बी कॉल्ड पैसिफिक सेटलमेंट ऑफ डिस्प्यूट्स. आर्टिकल 51 इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन का कोरिलेट कर लेना. ऑल राइट, इफ यू रिमेंबर Article 51 of the Indian Constitution, you will start understanding a few things. Only start. I'm not saying कि आज ही क्लास में समझ जाओगे, right? Understanding is the last thing. It happens gradually, and judgment is the ultimate thing. You should judge only when you have understood. Ideally, bureaucrats के पास इतना time नहीं होता. So pacific settlements of dispute, which means what? Which means that the Security Council first and foremost is concerned with maintaining peace at all costs. So it means that pacific settlement of dispute would be resolving the dispute in its early stages through peaceful means. All right. So that's where you will see under chapter 6 action, the UNSC promotes all efforts for peaceful resolution of differences. Right. It can be through identifications of principles, right, for a dialogue, or by appointing a political mission, or by appointing an emissary, special representative. All right. So these are some of the things that the Security Council would do. It would say, go and talk with each other. If you can't talk with each other, we will provide you the principles. We can also provide you the personnel. All right. Some important personality appointed as a special representative. Okay. So this is pacific settlement of disputes. That would always be the case. Right. Now, once a conflict has started in some ways, and then the issue comes to the Security Council, as happened in the context of Pakistan's invasion or aggression against India, 1947-48. So again, first attempt would be to first bring the conflict to a halt, cease fire. All right. So the Security Council then would promote mediation, reconciliation, and instruments like ceasefire. Right. So that's where it can also appoint groups like Military Observer Group for India, Pakistan, MOGIP. All right. Military Observer Group for India and Pakistan. After 1971, India says it has no validity because now the operative clause is bilateral, Simla agreement. Right. But it was created, if you understand, in that particular period. Right. So that's basically what it would do. And in between, if you want to know more, there have been various commissions set up by the UN and they have reports on Jammu and Kashmir. Right. So अपना काम खुद से करोगे तो सीख जाओगे, नहीं करोगे तो कोई बात नहीं. Right. Then carry someone else's opinion. है ना कि उसने ऐसा कहा था, मेरे बायस से फिट बैठता है, इसलिए this is the right opinion. Right. But basics सीख सकते हैं आप क्लास में. So first is chapter 6, pacific settlement of disputes. ठीक है. Now second, chapter 7 का टाइटल क्या है? टाइटल बहुत कुछ बता देता है. Chapter 7's title is action with respect to threats to the peace, breaches of the peace and acts of aggression. All right. मतलब पहले किसी के बीच में बहस चल रही है, छोटी मोटी बात है, तो उसको वही निपटा दो. अब किसी ने किसी को थप्पड़ मार दिया, घुसा मार दिया, है ना, और किसी तरह का वायलेंस कर दिया है, देश तो एक दूसरे को घुसा मारेंगे नहीं. राइट. सो दैट इन दैट कॉन्टेक्स्ट टाइटल फिर से सुन लो. एक्शन विथ रिस्पेक्ट टू थ्रेट्स टू द पीस. पीस को कोई भी खतरा, किसी भी खतरे से शांति ब्रीच हो सकती है. वो ब्रीचेस ऑफ पीस यानी कि शांति ब्रीच हो गई है. राइट. या फिर एक्ट्स ऑफ एग्रेशन, किसी ने किसी और पे हमला कर दिया. ऑल राइट. So all these are part of chapter 7 action. Right. So UN Security Council would take step by step action. Right. Depending on the seriousness of the nature. Now a dispute can be brought to the Security Council by one of its members or can be conveyed to the Security Council by the General Assembly through the office of the Secretary General. All right. In all these cases, this is something that would happen. Right. So chapter 7 sort of also incorporates certain stringent action. All right. Punitive action. So if, for example, the nature of crisis is serious and punitive actions are required, what kind of actions can the Security Council take? So Security Council, for example, can take actions like ordering financial penalty. All right. It can order a country to pay. It ordered Iraq to pay. Iraq paid through what was called oil for food program. Iraq's oil and its profits went to the UN. UN repatriated the money to Kuwait because during the Kuwait war, Iraq had invaded Kuwait and it had also put some of its oil wells to fire. तो उसके लिए एक फंड बना. सो फाइनेंशियल पेनल्टी. ऑल राइट. सेकेंड इज the steps like embargo. All right, what is embargo? Basically block the exit and entry points in that state. All right, block its ports, block its surface transport mechanisms, roads, etc. on the border, airspace also, right? So blockade. Then there is arms embargo, meaning a ban on the sale of arms to that country. All right, arms embargo. This is also what Security Council can order. And then sanctions, right? Asset freeze, travel ban. All right, this is something that can happen. And then something that you wait for and you think that that is something that should happen. Yes, the UN Security Council can also mandate a military action. All right, or a military mission. ठीक है. So this is an offensive action that it can order. It is not peacekeeping, right? It's simply military mission. It is not peacekeeping. Peacekeeping is separate. ठीक है. तो examples, for example, UN mandated a military mission which led to the US and its allies invading Iraq. All right. So Iraq was first given time, a deadline that you should withdraw from Kuwait. And once that deadline was not met by Saddam Hussein, the then leader of Iraq, UN mandated military action or military mission was put into action by US and its allies. All right. Then, of course, ISAF, International Security and Assistance Force, it was mandated by, it was an international coalition force. It was mandated by the UN. So, that kind of an action. Then, when, for example, Arab Spring happened, after that civil war broke out in some country, for example, Libya. So, in Libya, there was a great tussle in the Security Council over establishment of a no-fly zone over Syria, right? And then France bombed some of the regions in Africa, Mali, etc. So that is also what UN Security Council can do. It can declare a no-fly zone, all right, and then the military action can take place. So this is what the Security Council can do under Chapter 7. ठीक है? So ये दो तरह के action है, but you understand that UN does not have a standing military. So UN's action can only be put into effect by the willingness and contribution of its members. All right. So Kuwait war, UN mandated or not mandated, US was going because US wanted, it had found an opportunity to show its superiority. It would have done so. Afghanistan, whether UN mandated or not, it would have gone. All right. Iraq, right? And Iraq also. So basically you understand that in theory, of course, Security Council can do a lot of things. But in theory itself, like for example, veto being an example, there is a lot that blocks the Security Council action. And ultimately, countries vote on the basis of where their interests are, and of course, at the same time, while upholding certain principles. No country says that we are violating certain principles. Every country would say my interpretation is different. That is the art of diplomacy. You justify any number of things. ठीक है? तो this is basically the Security Council. समझ में आ गई आपको बात? Now let's go to, and today I will not take a break. So now let's go to, पूरे सेंटेंस में सवाल पूछोगे तो जवाब मिलेगा, नहीं तो टाइम वेस्ट होगा. बोलो. देखो, योर क्वेश्चन इज व्हाट इज द प्रोसेस ऑफ मेकिंग अ परमानेंट मेंबर इन सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल. उसका जवाब तुम्हें शुरू में ही मिल जाना चाहिए था. मैंने ऐसा इससे रिलेवेंट कुछ कहा है? रिलेवेंट, रिलेटेड कुछ कहा है? कहा है भाई इट वुड रिक्वायर अ चार्टर चेंज फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल प्रोसीजरली. Charter change would require 2/3 vote in the General Assembly and the support, meaning no exercise of veto. Support of the Security Council. All right. So that is basically, UN has not decided any criteria. सो दैट्स वाई उसका आंसर बीच में भी मिल जाता है जब मैंने कहा पोस्ट सेकेंड वर्ल्ड वॉर. The Security Council comes into existence because the UN comes into existence. So at that point in time, there were 5 members. Who are these 5 members? Allied powers. ठीक है? तो I've already given you the answer, and if that was an important question, and if there was a procedure mentioned in the charter, I would have mentioned it as well in the class. है ना? समझ में आ गया आपको बात? What type of resolution से क्या मतलब है आपका? इस साल पूरे सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल रेजोल्यूशन पास करता रहा. अखबार पढ़ रहे थे? कैसे रेजोल्यूशन पास किया? मुझे ही अपने सवाल का आंसर दे दो. व्हाट टाइप ऑफ रेजोल्यूशन? नहीं, ये काम नहीं हो रहा होता वहां पे. चाइना सपोर्ट वोट नहीं चल रहा वहां पे कि भाई वोट फॉर दिस वोट फॉर दैट. डिप्लोमेसी इज मोर सटल. वोट्स आर ऑलवेज ऑन इश्यूज. प्रोसीजरल इशू, सब्सटैंटिव इशू, वो इशू कैसा है वो भी सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल डिसाइड करेगा, है ना? सब्सटैंटिव इशू का मतलब कुछ एक्शन लेना हो. सो व्हाट टाइप ऑफ रेजोल्यूशन से क्या मतलब है तुम्हारा? तुम अगर मुझे कोई 2 रेजोल्यूशन दिखाते और कहते कि ये किस तरह का, तो मैं बात बता पाता. अब आपका क्या कहना है कि चाइना सपोर्ट्स पाकिस्तान. ऐसा कोई रेजोल्यूशन सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल ने पास नहीं किया जिसमें उसने मैंडेट किया हो कि चाइना सपोर्ट करे पाकिस्तान को. इट वुड बी ऑन एन इशू. कोई इशू ही होगा ना. जैसे व्हेन इंडिया वाज द चेयर, 2593 वाज अ रेजोल्यूशन व्हिच वाज पास्ड. बोला था मैंने अफगानिस्तान की क्लास में, ध्यान दे रहे होगे तो शायद आज तक जर्नी पूरी हो जाती. 2593 में क्या बोला था मैंने, क्या है उसके अंदर? अगर क्लास में जो बोला उस पर ध्यान देते और बाद में आके पढ़ लेते तो भी बात क्लियर हो जाती. ठीक है? तो आज तक तो मैं ये भरोसा नहीं कर पाया. अगर कोई चीज इंपॉर्टेंट होती तो हम उसको लेके आते क्लास में. तो आपके डाउट वहां से क्यों नहीं होते जो मैंने बोला है, जो मैंने पढ़ाया है? वहां से भी जब आपके डाउट होते हैं तो शुरू ऐसे होता है कि यू सेड दिस, और उसमें भी मुझे कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है. एक तो फॉर्मली एक गलत तरीका है बात करने का क्योंकि ऑब्जेक्टिविटी चली जाती है. दूसरा कि आपने सुना गलत मुझे और उस पर आप कह रहे हैं यू सेड दिस, है ना? सीख जाओ, अभी भी आखिरी क्लास है. Substantive procedural, 2 types of resolutions mainly you will see there, right? अब आपको ज्यादा जानना, आप यूएन में जाइए और देखिए उसको. ठीक है? मेंबर, परमानेंट मेंबर कौन होंगे, क्या क्राइटेरिया होगा? क्राइटेरिया बेस्ड नहीं है, राइट? इट वाज गवर्न्ड बाय द टाइम ऑफ द कॉन्टेक्स्ट ऑफ द टाइम. ऑलराइट, एंड देन आंसर आपको क्लास के अंत में भी मिलेगा when we go towards UN reforms, right? So let's then, after having taken your question, let's go forward. So this is UN Security Council, and please read the, जैसा मैंने आज कहा, समझो आज, और मैं धीरे भी हूं, दोहरा भी रहा हूं, लिख भी लो, right? But understand and then keep on reading, है ना? इसका कोई अंत नहीं है. So Security Council does these kinds of things. Now अखबार पढ़ोगे तो अपने आप दिखेगा कि रेजोल्यूशन किस बारे में था. रेजोल्यूशन कभी नहीं होगा कि यूएस अगेंस्ट रशिया. रेजोल्यूशन वुड बी ऑन सम प्रिंसिपल्स, टेरिटोरियल इंटीग्रिटी, सोवरेनिटी, है ना? इस तरह की चीजें. प्रोसीजरल इशू, फॉर एग्जांपल एक वोट इंडिया ने किया था सपोर्टिंग अ रेजोल्यूशन अलाउइंग यूक्रेनियन प्रेसिडेंट व्लादिमीर जेलेंस्की टू रेफर टू द यूएन सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल वाया वीडियो कॉन्फ्रेंस. दैट्स अ प्रोसीजरल वोट. ऑलराइट, दैट्स अ सिंपल वोट, राइट? तो कुछ चीजें धीरे धीरे भी समझोगे और कुछ चीजें शायद समझने की जरूरत ना पड़े बहुत लंबे समय तक, अनलेस आईएफएस ना बनो या यूएन सेक्रेटरी जनरल ना बनो या प्रेसिडेंट ऑफ दी सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल ना बनो. ठीक है, आगे चलते हैं. सो ये सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल का ये पूरा. अब थोड़ी सी एक चीज देख लेते हैं, बिकॉज इंडिया हैज बीन अ मेंबर, सो इन दैट कॉन्टेक्स्ट सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल बिकम्स इन फोकस. ऑलराइट, सो यू सी members of the security council are P5 not elected, so no question of talking about them. Now the non-permanent members 10 are elected in terms of certain understandings. They are elected on the basis of regional distribution, right? Asia, Pacific, East Europe and others. All right, so these basically are the areas, different areas, which basically denotes the idea that there is a aim of geographical representation. Okay. So India, of course, would go from the Asia category. Now, the election takes place at the General Assembly. All right. A non-permanent member of the Security Council is elected by the General Assembly. Simple vote. And the tenure of a non-permanent member of the Security Council is 2 years. All right. 2 years is the tenure of the non-permanent member of the Security Council. There is no bar on the immediate second term. But in the interest of representation, you will not see many countries repeating immediately after having served a term. Right? And India so far has served 8 terms in the Security Council as a non-permanent member. Right? Most recently 2021-22, before that 2011-12. All right. So non-permanent members elected on the basis of regional representation or give representation to different regions like Asia Pacific, Latin America, Caribbean, East Europe, others, Africa. And second, elected by General Assembly, simple vote, elected for 2 years tenure, right? So that's basically something that you learn as the basic information. All right. Now let's move forward. Let's go to the other organ of the UN. What is that other organ? So let's talk about the Secretariat. So this is the third important organ of the United Nations. Or before the Secretariat, let's talk about the ECOSOC, Economic and Social Council. So third important organ, and there is no order of priority here, right? It's just classification. So third important organ of the UN, principal organ of the UN, principal organ term hai. Principal organ of the UN is the Economic and Social Council. All right. So what is Economic and Social Council? First of all, Economic and Social Council is the main deliberative, policy making, policy implementation and monitoring body. Right? Main deliberative, policy making, policy implementation and deliberative body of the UN in the matters of development, science and technology, culture and environment. All right. So this is basically what the ECOSOC would do: deliberate, help in coming to a consensus, right? Then form a policy which would be adopted as a resolution, all right, which would be implemented by various programs, countries individually working with those programs, all right, and monitoring the implementation, what progress is being made. This is what the ECOSOC does. So if you are thinking about, for example, SDGs, at the highest level they have been approved at the Economic and Social Council, all right, and their implementation is first of all multidimensional, but primarily you will see the programs like UN Development Fund or UN Development Program would be working towards sustainable development goals. In environment, you will see you have the UN Environment, all right, अब उसका नाम है UN Environment, पहले नाम था United Nations Environment Program. So UN Environment also would help in implementation and help in shaping the opinion, shaping the policies. So who do you think ultimately the UN Environment is reporting to? So in the UN structure, ultimately the buck stops at ECOSOC in these kinds of issues. All right. So by definition, its area of coverage is broad, right? Now if you see, the Economic and Social Council's work is conducted through the council comprising of 54 members. All right, it has 54 members. India currently is a member of Economic and Social Council. Then the Economic and Social Council elects a president. All right, and the president of Economic and Social Council is for 1 year, right? 1 year. And the tenure of these 54 members is 3 years. All right. So General Assembly elects the 54 members of the Economic and Social Council for 3 years, who then elect a president every year. All right. So this basically is what we will see the Economic and Social Council generally would be doing. Now, when we move forward, what we see is UPSC already has asked a question in the mains examination. Kaisa question tha? A, first of all, it was about what is the ECOSOC, what it does, right? 10 marker tha. And the second was its functional commissions. All right. So basically, what you see is the Economic and Social Council has attached with it 5 regional commissions. All right, regional commissions, meaning you have, आप सुनते होंगे कभी, the UN escape. All right, Economic and Social Council for Asia Pacific, right? So these are regional commissions, right? 5 regional commissions which are doing same work, assisting the ECOSOC, and then it has functional commissions. So functional commissions, the regional commissions are about geographic reach. The functional commissions are about the technical areas in which the Economic and Social Council is working. All right. So the Committee on Women or the Statistical Council, right? These are, or the UN Forum on Forest. These are some of the functional commissions of the Economic and Social Council, right? So knowing this much about Economic and Social Council is basic. This would suffice. Now let's move to the other organ. Now this organ is Secretariat. All right. As I said, Secretariat is like the nerve center, bureaucratic nerve center of the UN. Located, of course, in the headquarter building in New York. So it is staffed by locally as well as internationally recruited international civil servants, bureaucrats. All right. So the office is headed by, the face of the Secretariat as an organ is the office of the Secretary General of the United Nations. All right. So Secretary General of the United Nations coordinates, all right, and uses his or her or their good offices to assist in peace building, all right, assist in making progress in areas of contention. So that's the face of the Secretariat, right? Secretary General is elected generally for a tenure of 5 years. It is renewable term, all right? It is renewable. It can be renewed, all right? And generally, appointment happens through the General Assembly on the recommendation of the Security Council. So, of course, if need be, there would be a vote in General Assembly. But if the Security Council does not support any candidate, and that means a permanent member does not support a candidate, they cannot become the Secretary General. And this is what had happened with Shashi Tharoor. All right, he contested for being a Secretary General. At that point in time, in that election, the US clearly said that it is backing Ban Ki-moon as the Secretary General of the UN, South Korean Foreign Minister, career diplomat, right? So then that is how it happens. Antonio Guterres is the current Secretary General from Portugal. So he was first appointed in 2017, right? And now he is going to continue, right? So then what you will see is, before Mr. Guterres, there was Ban Ki-moon. Before Mr. Ban Ki-moon, there was Kofi Annan. Before Mr. Kofi Annan, there was Boutros Ghali of Egypt. So generally you will see Kofi Annan got a 2-term, Ban Ki-moon got a 2-term, and Antonio Guterres is also going to get a 2-term. So this is the role of Secretary General, right? Assisting all the organs and of course presiding over the bureaucratic machinery of the United Nations. So you would have, for example, within the Secretariat, Department of Peacekeeping Operations. All right. So mandate, of course, of peacekeeping operations would come from UN Security Council. General Assembly, of course, would have a say because it's a main representative body. But ultimately, its implementation would be coordinated by a bureaucratic body. All right. Department of Peacekeeping Operations within the Secretariat. So that is how UN would function, right? So this is the secretariat, and after the secretariat there is an interesting permanent or principal organ of the UN, and that is called the Trusteeship Council. All right, Trusteeship Council. Now the Trusteeship Council was entrusted, its primary mandate was to assist 11 trust territories in gaining self-government. All right. So these were basically, understand, territories which were under the control of Italy or Germany or Japan, and mainly Africa or in the Pacific region you will find these territories, mainly islands. So what happens to them? So the idea was that they should be put under the mandate of trustees. Remember, League of Nations had mandate system, right? When we talk about Palestine, we said Palestine became a British mandate by the action of League of Nations. So similarly, UN had a trusteeship council and it has trust territories. These 11 trust territories acquired self-governance by 1994. By 1994, the function of trusteeship council was over. So the trusteeship council is the only principal organ of the UN which remains suspended. All right. So by a resolution, the trusteeship council suspended its operations, meaning it does not meet regularly. But if need be, it can be revived. All right, by the call or resolution of the Security Council. Right. So that is the trusteeship council, only principal organ of the UN which remains suspended. Why? Because its mandate was to assist 11 trust territories in gaining self-governance. The mandate was completed in 1994, right? And then the last permanent organ that we talk about is ICJ. As I said, I have already talked about the ICJ when we were dealing with Pakistan. So that's why Pakistan lectures takes more time, because it has more to learn, right? A, we are learning the first relation. B, we learn agreements like the Simla agreement or mainly the Indus Water agreement and other issues. But we also add FATF and ICJ. ICJ when we discuss the Kulbhushan Jadhav case, right? So just as a way of revision, ICJ first and foremost is the primary organ of the UN. It is the only primary organ of the UN or principal organ of the UN which is not located in the headquarters of the UN. So ICJ is located in The Hague, which is in the Netherlands. It comprises of 15 judges. These judges are elected by the General Assembly and the Security Council together for a tenure of 9 years. The idea behind having these 15 judges is again geographical representation. So judges are elected from a particular region. And second is also to ensure representation of diverse forms of legal systems. So what is the mandate then of the ICJ in these terms? So ICJ's role, so to say, is in two kinds of cases. One is its role in contentious cases, which is resolving disputes on legal questions between state parties. So only states are a party to contentious cases before the ICJ. Second is its advisory jurisdiction, which basically is a jurisdiction which is invoked by, which is available to UN and its authorized agencies. They can take legal opinion on issues from the ICJ. Now, there is a provision for special election in the ICJ. If a judge becomes incapacitated or dies while in office or resigns, so then election takes place for that seat for the remainder of the tenure. All right, special election, remainder of the tenure. Now, through this method, most recently, India's Justice Dalbir Bhandari was first elected in a special election in 2012 at the ICJ, and then he was elected in a regular election for 9 years in 2017. All right. So that's ICJ. We had discussed it in terms of its jurisdiction and other issues and India specific issues in Pakistan lecture. All right. And whenever it comes into current affairs again, we will be discussing it. So this should suffice. This is the UN. Now we can call it the UN itself. This is the UN itself. Now, but we also talk about UN system. What is the UN system? So UN system then comprises of the UN itself, which would be its principal organs as we talked about, and two, it would comprise of, the UN itself would comprise of what are called special programs and funds. Now special programs and funds, remember, are created by the principal organs and they serve under or report to the principal organs. All right, special programs and funds like, as I said, UNDP, UN Environment Program, UNEP, all right, UN Habitat. These are all what we can call the special programs and fund. There are many, so of course in any class we are not going to talk about them because it would be too factual. If you are interested, I have already provided it in detail in the printed material, right? But just understand that they fall under the category of special programs and fund created by principal organs, report to, work under the principal organs. So this is UN itself. Now UN system would comprise of another set of actors. Now these are called specialized agencies of the UN, right? Specialized agencies of the UN. Different sources sometimes would say 15, sometimes would say 16. So generally we consider 15 international organizations to fall in the category of what is called the specialized agencies of the UN. Now understand this terminology. Why specialized agencies? Specialized agencies because they have a special relation with the UN. That can be one meaning of special. Specialized can mean that they specialize, their work is in specialized areas, like some of them work in the area of trade, some of them work in the area of tourism, some of them work in the area of health, right? So that's basically the meaning of specialized, all right? And what is their relation with the UN? They don't work under the UN, but they work with the UN, all right? So technically they are independent international organizations. Why? Because they have their own charter, they have their own headquarters, they have their own membership, independent membership. But since their work overlaps with the work of the UN, so they work in cooperation with the UN. They cooperate with the UN. That's why the specialized agencies. 15 of them are there from the IMF, World Bank, WHO, WTO, World Tourism Organization, International World Meteorological Organization, International Civil Aviation Organization, International Telecommunications Union, Universal Postal Union. All of them are referred to as specialized agencies. All right, and this is what we call the UN system. All right, so UN family plus specialized agencies, right? So that's basically what the UN system looks like, right? And as I said, the way of preparing for organizations, one of the ways is to current affairs. So each of them, whenever they are in news, you already know what kind of institutions are they, and then current affairs gives you the detail. So for example, WHO I keep on discussing entire year because it is in news in one context or the other. So that's something that we decide that we cover through special programs or like PT 365, main 365 or current affairs. All right. Now, when we know about this system, there is this formula that I'm going to give you. Use it according to your ability. I'm sure some people would still not understand the validity of it, but if you understand this, then you can go back and look at the mains question of UPSC and you have a formula for answering them, right? So what is it? So just understand that no matter how good your intentions are, no matter how good a speech is, no matter how good the name of the scheme is, it cannot be implemented unless there are certain things which are available. For example, you do analysis on the basis of governance structure. All right. So that's why economic survey says so many schools, so many community health centers, so many primary health centers. पूछ लो इंटरव्यू में तो पता नहीं होता, पता नहीं क्यों यूपीएससी ये तैयारी कर रहे हैं, है ना? ये publicly available data है. These are governance related issues. How many teachers are there, right? How many teachers need to be recruited? Governance issues. And the other issue is outlay, finance. So governance issues would also lag behind if there is no finance. So where is the finance coming from in India is the subject matter of understanding or studying the budget और इकोनॉमी. आप इकोनॉमिक्स नहीं पढ़ते, आप इकोनॉमी पढ़ते हैं, ये आप ध्यान दें सिविल सर्विसेज एग्जामिनेशन के लिए. इकोनॉमिक्स नहीं पढ़ते. इकोनॉमिक्स इज नॉट द मेन टास्क, बट विदाउट नोइंग सम इकोनॉमिक्स यू कैन नॉट स्टडी इंडियन इकोनॉमी. सो टू दैट एक्सटेंट यू स्टडी कॉन्सेप्ट्स ऑफ इकोनॉमी, मेनली मनी सप्लाई, mainly national income and accounting. This is what you mainly are studying in this examination. So कुछ लोगों को यूपीएससी की तैयारी करके ये हो जाता है कि वो इकोनॉमिक्स से एक्सपर्ट हो गए. इतनी जल्दी नहीं, थोड़ा और साल लगाएं आप. It's all about patience. Now you understand, if we apply this to organizations, so they're, of course, they are serving a principle, they are based on principles, they are serving certain ideals, they are serving a mandate which is lofted and useful. But none of this is going to be successful unless it is implemented. And the implementation is happening A, in the countries which are members of the UN. The implementation is going to take place there. B, the implementation is going to take resources. So those resources would also come from UN ने कोई स्टॉल नहीं लगाया हुआ है या किराए पे दुकान नहीं दी हुई कि उसकी इनकम आ रही है. So that money comes from its members. All right. And once you understand this and understand this one line, any organization is as good or as bad as its members make it to be. All right. And certainly we are not saying all members, but we are saying at least some members. Right. So please understand, this is what UPSC has been asking in the examination. It asked a question on UNESCO, too much politics, too less cash. पॉलिटिक्स किन के बीच में होगी? बिटवीन द मेंबर्स. करंट अफेयर्स बेस्ड क्वेश्चन, यूनेस्को के बारे में कवरेज आ रहा था, आपने पढ़ा होता तो आपको समझ में आ जाता मतलब क्वेश्चन का. टू लेस कैश, दिस इज व्हाट? दिस इज फंडिंग. दैट इज व्हाट द यूपीएससी आस्क्ड. ऑलराइट. सो दिस इज समथिंग दैट मेनी पीपल डोंट अंडरस्टैंड. स्ट्रक्चर, मैंडेट and formal nature of the organization and informal aspects around it. So one is funding, where you see this, and thereby you should understand that the functioning of these organizations is not free of A, interests and priorities of its important members, because they are in the position to shape the agenda, shape the funding of UN programs. And B, then we can say that it is affected by the geopolitics of the day also. For example, Russia, Ukraine crisis, you see geopolitics is playing out in such a way that two important actors, US and Russia, cannot agree on the question, right? So geopolitics, interests of the members, that is politics of any organization. So understand the politics of an organization in this term, the polity of the organization. Polity में क्या पढ़ते हो? Polity में पढ़ते हो constitution plus political history. All right. So understand the formal aspects in terms of charter, what it does, mandate, structure, because it is coming from something formal. All right. So basically this is the analysis that should go into it. WHO के बारे में question पूछा, critical analysis. So of course, one hand there is formal information that WHO is a specialized organ of the UN, which is active since 1948. Its primary goal is to ensure adequate health for all, right? And it generally is a technical body, advisory body, policy setting body, and helps in the implementation of these policies to its member countries. But it is in no position to enforce anything. So that's why you acknowledge what WHO is all about, right? And you also then criticize it on this basis. Since WHO's agenda, since WHO's operations, and since WHO's funding are in the hands of few of its members, so it is periodically a center of criticism. For example, US under Donald Trump criticized the WHO for reflecting Chinese interest. It criticized the Director General of WHO for being lenient on China, or delaying sending a team to China, or probing into the animal origins of COVID-19. All right. So that's one criticism which is explained by geopolitics, one country not agreeing with other. The other major part of that is that WTO's majority of funding comes from what is called voluntary funding, not mandatory funding. All right. So here again you understand this concept. Any organization in this context that we have talked about is funded by two kinds of sources of contribution. One is mandatory contribution, another is voluntary contribution. Mandatory is like you pay a fee to come and sit for the service of coming and sitting and listening to the lectures, right? You cannot come and sit here without paying that fees, because that is how the professional structure is, right? Any club you go to, sometimes you pay a membership fee. You go to a gym, you pay a membership fee. So that's mandatory. You cannot say mera man hua voluntarily, so I will give. Agar nahi hua to nahi, right? So understand, the UN, for example, its main budget, which comprises of the mandatory funding, is first of all decided by General Assembly. So I said General Assembly has 6 committees. One of the committees is Committee on Budgetary Issues, Financial Issues. So that committee decides which member should pay how much. Why? In order for UN to function. So its main budget comprises of mandatory contributions made by all its members. Now this is decided on the basis of certain formula. So mostly the formula which is used is a combination of macroeconomic factors like size of the GDP, but also using the principal capacity to pay, which is per capita national income, all right, or GNP per capita, right? So on this basis, mandatory contribution is decided. A country has to pay, right? So that's where the money is coming from. Mandatory, you have to give it, right? It's legally binding. Now the large proportion of funding is through voluntary funding, meaning now this is not mandatory, not binding on members, but each member can decide what they would like to contribute, right? So that is where if you have more money, you do more humanitarian work, you do more charity work, right? But in all these scriptures, you will find stories where, for example, there is a story in the Bible, there is a version of it in various Indian texts also, right? And generally civilizational stories have some similarities. So in which a poor lady donates all that she had, and maybe she had a coin, to Christ, and he said that that was the most valuable contribution that he got. इस तरह की बहुत सारी कहानियां, right? And while at the same time there were rich people who were, giving him lavish gifts. For him, the most important gift was the single coin that the women had, who then contributed. So when you have money, of course, your ability to pay increases. And then why would you pay? All right. So advocates of privatization, corporatization of everything says consumer pays. Road banao, logo se lo, pani do, logo se lo, right? So this is basically the different management, public management, new public administration formulas which have been coming up, right? So you understand that जब हम टैक्स भी कर रहे होते हैं तो हम सोचते हैं ना कि who can pay, who can't pay. Middle class always pays. All right. For example, I can't, and I don't want to save my taxes. All right, or avoid my taxes. But what you see is that in any financial system, the rich are proportionately paying less, and the poor are proportionately paying more. So, for example, we always say that if a poor person is buying a matchstick, right? A lot of people make taxpayer argument. If a poor person is buying a matchstick, they are paying tax on it. All right. If somebody is buying oil, they are paying tax on it. Salt, they are paying tax on it. So then you understand that एक तरफ वो contribution आपको दिखता नहीं because it is not large, but you know who is the richest person in India, what is their net worth, big boss में कितना इनाम मिलता है, और who is paid what, superstars are paid what, cricketers are paid what, right? तो इसको लगाओ इसमें एग्जाम में. So if you see, criticism would be that most of these organizations are dependent for their work in large part to the voluntary funding provided by its members, and thereby large donors and large providers of aid then have a disproportionate say on the expenditure. They decide the priorities and thereby the decision making of these organizations. So what was the point? The point is very simple. You analyze on the basis of formal structure, mandate, but also informal politics, including the politics in terms of contributions, by using technical terms like voluntary contribution and mandatory contribution, funding and organization. क्वेश्चन निकाल के देखो, समझ में आ जाएगा. कुछ सालों में करंट अफेयर्स में निकाल के देखो, समझ में आ जाएगा. If your intent is to understand, right? So क्लास में यही हो सकता है. We can teach you exam if you take the responsibility of reading, right? Otherwise it's all about मुझे डिक्टेशन दे दो, मुझे ये कर दो, मैं उसके बाद नहीं पढ़ूंगा. ठीक है, तो ये आपको समझ में आ गई बात. अब यहां पे इसको लाते हैं टू द पॉइंट वेयर वी वर. सो अंडरस्टैंड, विद इन द यूएन द मेन बजट ऑफ द यूएन, बिजली का बिल, हेडक्वार्टर का, तनख्वाह, ये इसमें खर्च हो जाता है. तो जो बड़े बड़े पॉवर्टी एलिवेशन प्रोग्राम, ये सब के लिए पैसा कहां से आएगा, right? So that's why money, finance, outlays are important. Understanding outlays is important, right? So then what you will see is this, that the United Nations and specialized agencies or its programs, their performance is always analyzed on these points. All right? यही points पे आपको analyze करना होता है. ठीक है? So the specialized agencies of the UN are independent organization because they have a concrete structure, headquarter, charter, independent membership, but also because they are funded by both mandatory and voluntary contributions. All right? But you would generally see that the voluntary contribution is disproportionately large. That's why WHO is right now in the process of creating a consensus to endorse a new funding formula. Now WHO is saying from 20% to 50%, there should be a rise in the share of mandatory contribution. All right? So that's what is happening around the world. That's what the UPSC is asking a question about. Now, the special programs and funds, if you would remember, because abhi baat ki hai, they are created by the principal organs of the UN. They work under it. And how are they funded? So they are not funded by the main budget of the UN, क्योंकि पैसा इतना बचता नहीं. So again, the special programs and funds of the UN are funded by voluntary contribution. So that's why some countries may have a disproportionate influence in decision making while there are deliberations. All right? So it's always about your capacity to influence decision. कोई आपका चेहरा देख के और अच्छा भाषण सुन के नहीं करता कुछ भी आपके लिए. Please remember this. No matter how good a speech you give anywhere, that would influence 20 years old, 24 years old, and those beyond 30 years old who have outsourced their thinking. But that is not how it happens. It happens through interest. कोई भी आपके लिए कोई काम इसलिए करेगा because they expect that when they require, you would also do something for them. It can be a vote in the UN Security Council. जरूरी नहीं कि आप वैसा ही वोट करो, पर कहीं ना कहीं तो आप कुछ करोगे ना. तो जो बोइंग को डील गई और जो एयरबस को डील गई, that also has a larger use, larger purpose. All right? So ये आपको हमेशा ध्यान रखना चाहिए. और इसीलिए ऑर्गेनाइजेशन जब इंटरेस्ट बेस्ड काम करने लगोगे तो कोऑपरेशन नहीं कर पाओगे अनलेस अपने इंटरेस्ट को बहुत ब्रॉडली. इसीलिए हम कहते हैं एनलाइटेंड सेल्फ इंटरेस्ट, नैरो माइंडेड सेल्फ इंटरेस्ट नहीं कि मैं बन गया, मैं सबसे इंटेलिजेंट, मुझे क्लास में ध्यान दिया जाना चाहिए, है ना, मेरी जरूरतें सबसे ज्यादा. नहीं, ऐसे तो कोई कोऑपरेशन नहीं होगा. यू कैन ईदर रिमेन अ किड लाइक दैट फॉर होल योर लाइफ, या आप सेल्फ सर्विंग इंडिविजुअल बन जाएंगे, किसी ऑफिस के कोने में बैठे होंगे, आपका काम यही होगा कि किसी की बात पसंद आई, किसी ने अच्छे से बात की तो उसका काम करोगे, और किसी की बात पसंद नहीं आई, कोई पढ़ा लिखा आ गया, उसने किसी को लॉ बता दिया आपको, तो उसको कहोगे ज्यादा बताओगे कानून, यही करेंगे आप. अगर आप नहीं समझ पाए कि एनलाइटेंड सेल्फ इंटरेस्ट क्या होता है, you not only better yourself but you better your society also. All right? कचरा अपने घर में अच्छा नहीं लगता तो पड़ोसी के घर के सामने भी मत फेंको. That's understanding cooperation. All right? And that is where I had said that if you have, आप अगर इस मुगालते में जी रहे हैं कि you are a self-made person, so then that is a fallacy that you should correct. Without cooperation, nobody achieves success. All right? And success always is determined, or failure determined at the end of the life, बीच में नहीं, right? So voluntary and mandatory contribution. ठीक है, तो अब हमने UN के बारे में जान लिया. दूसरी चीज जो हम जानेंगे, and now we are going towards the last stages, some analysis. What kind of questions UPSC asks? So I gave you some idea about this, that add this formula plus current affairs. आपका तैयार हो जाएगा organization. Go and look at the nature of the question, right? Second is, let's now start asking questions. From India's perspective, what is important for India? And also from the perspective of the future of global order. So some people would say multilateralism is in crisis. All right? What is the meaning of it? The meaning is the long-standing complaints against these traditional multilateral institutions. Coming from whom? It comes from traditionally developing, least developed countries, global south, countries of the third world, because they think that their interests are not adequately represented. They are not adequately physically also represented, for example, in the case of UN Security Council. Right? Their criticism is also that the decisions and structures of these bodies reflect the interests and values of only certain set of countries. So that is the meaning of multilateralism in crisis. Second set of challenge to multilateralism, as we have known it, is coming from how powerful countries now are moving towards greater focus on nationalism, narrow nationalism, protectionism, and prioritizing their own interests. So it means then we are necessarily looking at a world which is fragmented, which is not as cohesive. What brings cohesion? Either a tremendous conflict, for example, COVID-19, crisis, all right, or a conflict, that will bring cohesion. जब आप हार जाते हैं तो आप बहुत कुछ सीखने को तैयार हो जाते हैं. जब आपको लग रहा है आप जीत रहे हैं तो आपको किसी की बात सुनने का टाइम नहीं होता. So crisis brings about this moment where new regeneration would take place. What would be the crisis? That we don't know. COVID-19 came. Before that, the crisis was shaping up in the form of contentions between US and China under President Trump, President Xi Jinping. But systemically, we know that these two countries are going to collide, come what may. All right, what form it would take, we don't know. COVID-19 came. Now, COVID-19 was something which gave us the opportunity to redefine human consciousness, international relations. हम सभी अच्छे हो गए थे, right? Because the death was staring in our face. ठीक है? But what happened after COVID-19? आपकी जिंदगी भी normal चल रही है. You don't have to put mask. Forget about putting mask. You would not follow rules of not crowding. You will not follow rules of not sneezing, not coughing. All right? और those rules जो हम सीख रहे थे कोविड के, कर रहे हो नहीं कर रहे हो, लाइफ वैसी ही होगी. एंड दिस इज द ट्रेजेडी ऑफ ह्यूमन बींग्स. इसलिए यूपीएससी ऐसे पूछता है, हिस्ट्री रिपीट्स इटसेल्फ, फर्स्ट as comedy, tragedy, first as farce and then as tragedy, or first as tragedy and then as farce, because we don't learn from history. We human beings remain the same. So that is where the crisis is evident, that even in response to COVID-19, while there was a greater need for cooperation, and it was evident also, we cannot say that without cooperation it would have been possible. Remember, if India is manufacturing those vaccines, it's supplying, it's part of the solution. But also remember, AstraZeneca, Oxford, and other Western companies developed this vaccine. All right? So that's basically how we should look at the world. We need each other. And then, ये जब thinking prevail करेगी, तो cooperation बढ़ता हुआ अपने आप दिखेगा. आजकल दुनिया भर की thinking क्या है? Protectionism, narrow nationalism, my people, I am great, and I will only defend my interests. Then cooperation would go in a low drive. All right? And then what you will see? More cooperation on the basis of interest. That's why minilateral, smaller groupings. Right? But the crisis to multilateralism is been in the making, and one part always has been polarization. All right, great power politics. So US would not like to leave the chair, China would like to sit on the chair, Russia would like to remind us that it cannot be ignored. So again, this is interest based. This is interest based politics. If US is doing something promoting IPEF, why do you think it is doing it now? All right, why do you think for US India may be important now? Right? So this is the politics of it. This we largely then start calling geopolitics, how countries interact with each other, take decisions, and what are their priorities. Okay? So multilateralism is under strain. Another example is how WTO, which came into existence in 1995, and it represents what we call a rules-based multilateral global trading order. All right. Now, after the advent of WTO in 1995, there have been definite benefits. For example, a simple benefit would be expansion of global trade. Global trade has expanded. Countries have benefited from trade. Their GDP's real incomes have expanded. And this income may also have translated into development parameters. Right? WTO, to start with, was criticized again for being West-centric, for in a certain way affecting the interests of the poorest. So that criticism is there. But now the other criticism is coming from some countries who may not be now as interested in the WTO as earlier. For example, United States. Now United States is virtually responsible for, West is virtually responsible for building this system because they were the important traders. So trade rules were set in such a way that basically promoted the idea of a liberal free market trading order. And this standard model is something they have been pursuing. Developing countries have been pointing out, and we have examples, that their development imperatives, local conditions may be different. So they may require a different model. So it's all about rethinking of the economic model, right? So then what is happening? WTO created a rules-based order. Now the developing and least developed countries expect that if there is a rules-based order, it would be a level playing field, they would benefit more. So they want that order. But what you see is Doha Development Round, which is the latest round of negotiations, which had to focus on the issues of developing countries in terms of implementation of certain WTO agreements, is not yet complete. All right. So developing countries still have their grievances. Now developed countries like US have been criticizing WTO by saying that WTO has been lenient on China. China's self-categorization as a developing country has allowed it to take disproportionate advantage of the global trading rules. All right, ये यूएस का क्रिटिसिज्म है. WTO के अंदर किसी भी देश कोई क्राइटेरिया नहीं है कौन डेवलपिंग और कौन डेवलप्ड है, ये सेल्फ सर्टिफिकेशन पे होता है. All right, so that's the criticism of US. Then WTO established rules but also dispute resolution mechanism. All right, so the ideal way is if you have any complaints, you go by the process. What is the process? You basically complain to the WTO. WTO would first establish a consultation panel, talk and resolve. Consultation fail, a panel would be established. Now legal issues would be discussed. Panel would give a report. Report would either be accepted or be challenged. So the country which has a complaint against the report can challenge it. It goes to appeal. Appellate tribunal is comprising of 7 members. These 7 members of the appellate tribunal hear cases in the quorum of 3. Now appointment of these members is done on the basis of consensus. Every member should agree. US has been blocking the appointment of members of appellate tribunal of WTO dispute settlement body. All right. So this is another challenge. बातचीत में progress नहीं हो रही, issues have not been addressed. Some countries, larger countries, Western countries are taking a stringent stance. And then what is happening? The world is becoming much more complex. Now we are talking about transition in supply chains. All right, supply chain resilience. And we are talking about technology. We are talking about what would be the future of data trade. These issues are not being discussed at WTO because WTO in a way has become dysfunctional, right? So then what will happen is that countries would still like to cooperate with others because you cannot live on your own. But then they would like to cooperate with like-minded countries, friendly countries, and thereby multilateralism would go regional or would be based on geopolitics and geoeconomics or geoeconomic interests of countries. So challenges to multilateralism, right? And that comes to the UN also. Now, where is it that India stands? Understand, A, for India, UN represents the global multilateral order, meaning this is the organization that we put our faith the most in. So India has faith in the UN, India has respect for the UN. All right, it thinks for multilateralism to succeed, UN is required. It thinks for global challenges to be addressed adequately, UN is required. It certainly agrees, India certainly agrees that one of the achievements of the UN has been the prevention of the Third World War. But India has certain dissatisfaction also. So that's basically where we come to the idea of the need for reforms. So now let's come from where we were earlier. India believes in the UN, has faith in the UN, respects the UN, and thinks that it is important for multilateralism. But what is the caveat? So for India, the world has become much complex since the time of the formation of the UN. It's a complex world that we live in. The nature of global challenges has also become complex. And these global challenges are transnational in nature. So we need a transnational body, multilateral body like the UN. But for UN itself, what is required is a reform, an overhaul. The onus is on UN. For it to be effective in the current context, it needs to evolve into a transparent, into a representative body based on democratic principles. All right, that is what India wants. That UN should reform in order to remain relevant. And UN's relevance is there because most of world's problems are transnational in nature, right? So keep this in mind. Now, just go and see what is it that India is seeking reforms for. So there you come to the idea of criticism of the UN. What are the criticisms? One is about its effectiveness over these long years, right? So certainly it's a mixed bag record. UN has advanced the idea of cooperation for development. UN has, for example, promoted UNFCCC mandated dialogue, all right? So we still see UN's involvement in important developments around us. But on the same count, what we also see is the criticism is, A, UN has become a frozen relic of the past, all right? UN has become, and there is a criticism for all, IMF, World Bank also, old multilateralism. So it's a relic of the past. It represents the reality of the post-Second World War period. All right? It represents the realities of the post-Second World War period. And third is that it is not representative. For example, the United Nations Security Council clearly lacks representation from Africa and South America, but also the representation from Asia is not adequate. All right, so it is non-representative. Second idea is, while most of the programs of the UN are relevant, are being applied in some areas, for example, its peacekeeping operations mainly are ongoing in Africa. African countries or true contributing countries like India are not adequately part of the decision-making process. So stakeholdership is not there. So what kind of reform is India seeing? India wants a comprehensive and time-bound reforms of the UN as a way of strengthening multilateralism, as a way of meeting the complex challenges of the day, all right, from security conflict issues, to environmental issues, to food security issues, to energy security issues. All these issues make the challenges complex, right? So India wants a comprehensive reform of the UN, number one. India wants a reform which makes the UN a representative body, a transparent body, an accountable body, and also a multi-stakeholder body. All right, those affected by the decisions must be a part of it. Now, within the UN itself, now let's come into the UN. This issue has been talked about. For example, when India became part of NAM, India's foreign policy principle was non-alignment. Non-aligned movement is the name of movement where the countries who had similar foreign policy stance came together. Now, these NAM countries, and by definition, India as one of the leaders, represented a voting bloc at the UN, which later translated into formation of bodies, groups like G77. G7, G20 sabne suna hai. G77 formed in 1964 was to act as a unified voice of the developing world. And what were they demanding? G77, developing least developed countries, NAM countries were demanding a new international economic order. Whether you call it a new international economic order or you call it some other order, the idea is very simple, that the order should be just, based on rules, transparent, participatory, representative, stakeholder in nature. All right? That's what the meaning of it is. This debate is not of today. It's been there. Hota ye hai, what happens is with context, and now I've seen enough decades to say this with experience. Earlier I had read it, now time has given me that perspective. That is, so it's a cyclical order of ideas. Some ideas are very popular today, but understand these ideas would also start looking limited in the time to come. Then somebody would say that this idea is not good, we need something new. And where do you think that new would come from? The new would come from something older, all right, apart from the current context. So that's something that would continue happening. Within the UN also, apart from this, the issues that our voice should be represented by the developing world or global south. For example, UN created a South-South Commission, all right, in the 1980s, precisely to focus on these kind of issues, right? Now, if you see, these issues are still relevant, all right? Issues of development, issues of global justice, global disarmament, including nuclear and general disarmament, right? Combating climate change, preventing space conflict, all these are relevant. पर कौन करेगा? We say a UN which is transparent, representative, etc. ठीक है? Within the UN, this debate in the 1990s took the form of reform. UN General Assembly in 1992 passed a resolution for reform. One of the ideas was Security Council reforms. Security Council reforms is perhaps the example of what we say India wants a comprehensive reform of the UN. For example, some countries, for example, Donald Trump suggested budgetary reforms, that other countries should pay more, UN should administer its finances more effectively. India says that is also fine, staffing reforms are also fine, but reforms would only be comprehensive when there is reforms in the structure of the UN Security Council. All right, so now it is an example. So the General Assembly resolution of 1992 said that the criticism of Security Council is that A, it has been a victim of great power politics. B, its decision reflect the values of and interest of a certain group of countries. And C, there is no criteria for inclusion as a permanent member or a non-permanent member. There is no criteria, right? So that's basically the point, the weaknesses which were pointed out by General Assembly debates. That's what happens. General Assembly debate में कम से कम issue निकल के आएंगे, then opinion, then weight of the opinion. Then this idea gathered momentum under the Secretary Generalship of Kofi Annan. Why? Because 2000, 1990s, 2000, so millennium is changing. Now there, the UN is going to celebrate, international community is going to celebrate the Millennium Summits. That's why you will see first development goals developed in the 1990s were Millennium Development Goals. All right. And then Millennium Development Goals are now replaced by or subsumed under the Sustainable Development Goals. All right. So that is what is happening. So Kofi Annan's efforts lead to various ideas, deliberations are happening. So from that comes one of the ideas, and इसको कभी कभी हम कोफी अन्नान फॉर्मूला भी कह देते हैं, about expansion of non-permanent category, about what is the optimal number of the Security Council. So 24 to 28 according to this formula would be the optimal number. But you see, under Kofi Annan, this idea of reform gets some momentum. All right, it is discussed. Then you will see around 2005-6, we have the beginning of negotiation for this purpose, which is generally called the intergovernmental negotiation. Current affairs पढ़ा होगा, देखा होगा, IGN process सुना होगा. Intergovernmental negotiation started, all right, in the 2000, around 2005-6. Now this intergovernmental negotiation is something where we can say that for the first time there is some effort at negotiating, discussing the issues of UN reform, UNSC reforms. But we are not satisfied with that also, because the IGN process remained weak. For example, it did not maintain any continuity. It was simply a forum where countries can come and express their ideas on the issue of reform. It did not lead to any concrete outcome. So countries like India have been demanding now text-based negotiation. All right, text-based, TBN. From IGN, intergovernmental negotiation, now what we want is text-based negotiation. It simply means that deliberations should lead to outcome documents. These outcome documents should reflect the positions and opinions of participating countries, and this then should be the basis of further negotiations. All right, so यही अंतर है ना, अपने को IAS समझना, एग्जाम देते समय कलेक्टर समझना, वैसे जवाब देना, बोलना और वैसा लिखना सीखना में. All right, तो बोलने के लिए ज्ञान बहुत सारे लोग दे देते हैं. It's all about, can you put that to paper? Because once you put something to paper, अगर आपका डिबेट करने से किसी से मन है, so write an article. If you are offended by an article, write an article. नहीं, but writing an article is difficult. Writing a tweet is easy, so you will choose the easy option. Write. लिखने से किसी भी चीज की असलियत और औकात पता चल जाती है, आपको भी अपनी पोजीशन पता चल जाएगी, and then only you can make. So this is the idea. Let's have a concrete basis, and this is what? Text. Distribute the text, ask for opinions, improve the text, ask for opinions, further improve the text, and then finally there would be a draft of how new reforms are there. So right now what is happening is the IGN process is there, but India wants a text-based negotiation process. All right. Now the ideas have been there about how many members, which categories, but what is the merit of India's candidature as a permanent member? So it's very simple, that deliberations within UN said that any new member should ensure representation in terms of demography, in terms of geography, should be a substantial military power, should be a substantial economic power. All right. So these ideas came of what can be the basis of selecting permanent or non-permanent members, generally non-permanent members. So then question comes, what is the merit of India's claim or India's candidature as a permanent member of the Security Council? Number one is India's inclusion as a permanent member gives representation to a diverse and large demography. All right, not only gives representation to Asia, but it is bringing representation to a diverse, different communities, Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Isai, you name, different communities are there, different geographical communities are there, right? So that is what is happening. India is world's largest democracy. So it is also bringing legitimacy to the table. Legitimacy, provides legitimacy to the Security Council, right? Because many of the permanent members don't have a democratic credential. All right, some of our friends, some of them are not our friends, but they don't have great democratic credentials. So inclusion of India brings this legitimacy factor also, that it is the world's largest democracy. Next, India's contribution to the UN are not substantial, but have always been timely. So you will see every year, for example, in the month of January, there would be a small, that in this year also India has submitted its contribution before time. So India's contribution, though not large, but have been timely. All right. And India is world's 5th largest economy. So thereby, India's contribution to the UN can also be substantial, both in mandatory funding and voluntary funding. Third is India's contribution. India has participated in almost all missions and programs and projects of the UN. It has contributed either expertise or ideas or resources. So that participation also is the merit of India's candidature. Most important example of that is India is the historically largest troop contributor to the peacekeeping operations of the UN. Largest troop contributor to the peacekeeping operations of the UN. That is India's contribution. All right. The peacekeeping operation hota hai. So countries contribute troops. क्या होता है बस अंतर? The UN peacekeepers use a UN beret, है ना? इसीलिए उनको blue berets भी कहा जाता है, जो टोपी लगाते हैं नीले कलर की, right? But they are serving their country. So क्या होता है कि इनिशियली आप कंट्रीब्यूट करते हैं, बाद में आपको UN इक्विपमेंट के लिए और पर्सनल के लिए पे करता है, वो रियम्बर्स होता है बाद में, लेकिन पहले तो आप कंट्रीब्यूट कर रहे हैं. So countries like India have regularly contributed, largest troop contributor, currently among the top 3 troop contributors, historically largest, but also Indians have lost life, Indians have suffered casualties and fatalities while serving the UN in these peacekeeping operations. So largest number of fatalities in US peacekeeping operations has also been suffered by India. That is the merit of India's candidature. Now militarily also, if you see, India is a significant military power, and you should always try to express this in terms of military spending. All right. It's another fact that India is also a nuclear power, but that brings the complexity of signing NPT, etc. So we say that India is not only a significant military power, but India also has a responsible track record as a military power. All right. Responsible track record. So not only a credible military track record, but also a responsible military track record makes India an ideal candidate for a permanent membership of the Security Council. This is the merit of India. 1, representation to large and diverse demography, representation to Asia. 2, the idea of India's contribution to the UN, financially, India's economic size. 3, legitimacy, democracy. 4, India's contribution to peacekeeping. 5, and all programs of the UN. 5, India's credible and responsible military track record. All right. So that's basically what makes India or India's candidature logical. But it's one thing that to desire something, it's another thing to achieve. Because most of the times, things that we want to achieve are subject to multiple external factors. इसलिए IR में बड़ी-बड़ी बातें नहीं करनी चाहिए. Right? Keep it really simple. So what are the challenges for India's candidature? UPSC इस तरह के बहुत सवाल पूछ चुका है, पॉलिटिकल साइंस में भी और GS में भी, right? Merit of India's candidature, challenges to India's candidature. So challenges to India's candidature comes from the specific attitude of countries, but that would be a very narrow way of understanding it. All right, let's explain it through all these combined factors, right? So 1, the challenge comes from the objections of countries, right? So for example, with Pakistan, जिसका नाम लेना आप सभी को बहुत पसंद है, किसी भी केस में ऑब्सेशन है पाकिस्तान के साथ, भाई साहब, फॉरेन पॉलिसी मतलब पाकिस्तान, हर दूसरा तीसरा वीडियो अबाउट पाकिस्तान, कितना पढ़ोगे पाकिस्तान, right? So you see what we are saying, that some countries, for example, of course Pakistan would oppose, but is Pakistan strong enough to be the most important factor? Not at all. So you understand that there is opposition in various ways. There may be individual opposition to individual candidature, for example, a Pakistan for India. There may be issue-based differences. So issue-based differences are largely represented by the ideas discussed within what is called, and you have heard of it, Uniting for Consensus Club. All right, Uniting for Consensus Club. इसका एक और नाम है जो शायद आप लोग ज्यादा याद रखना चाहते हैं, कॉफी क्लब. All right. So Uniting for Consensus countries or coffee club countries have different ideas as compared to India on UN Security Council reforms. So you understand that this is a large and informal group, right? So their differences may be on questions like, for example, whether there should be extension of veto power to new permanent members, or on the idea that whether permanent category should be enhanced, extended, expanded, or non-permanent categories, right? What is the ideal number? So on these issues, these countries have different views. Some countries may have apprehensions regarding India's nuclear program and not signing the NPT. So differences of opinion exist at different level and they have to be resolved. So coffee club or uniting for consensus, right? That is one opposition. Pakistan is part of coffee club, but Italy is also there, Argentina is also there, right? Second challenge, and perhaps it is the most important challenge, comes from the ambiguous approach of the P5. All right? Ambiguous approach of the P5. Right? What ambiguous approach? So everybody is happy that when America says that we will support India as a permanent member, Russia says, UK says, France says, China sometimes has said it, but China's approach is further ambiguous. It never says yes, never says no. Right? But none of the countries have committed to a concrete timeline for UN Security Council reforms. So that's the ambiguous approach. All right, they are non-committal. We can say that those who have power don't want to share power. The P5 does not want to share the table, right? But diplomatically we are saying that the P5 has an ambiguous approach. On the one hand, they support India's candidature. On the other hand, they have not committed to a particular timeline. All right. So अगर मुझे कोई कहे कि I will make you so and so, my interest would be when, कब. All right, life is short. कल बना रहे हो तो बताओ. You are a very important person for me. परसों तो मैं देख ही लूंगा. All right. So that's the idea. Ambiguous approach. Third is lack of consensus among important grouping of countries. For example, lack of consensus among Latin American countries or South American countries over who should be the permanent member. All right. Argentina would like it, maybe Brazil would like it. Not a big issue. In Africa, Africa has no representation. Again, in Africa, there is no consensus. Nigeria would like to be a member, but why not South Africa? All right, a solution can be, why not give 3 seats to 4 seats, 5 seats to Africa? All right, 10 seats to Asia, 1 seat to Europe. All right, 1 seat to US. Why not do this? So, iska solution hai. But we can still say that there is a lack of consensus, right, among important stakeholders like Latin American countries or African countries on the issue of candidature for permanent membership, right? 4. And 5th is always add contextual, right? Or the next point, always add contextual. What is happening around you? So you see the current polarization, global polarization, is also not conducive for achieving a consensus on this issue. The more geopolitical fault lines open, the greater the polarization, the lesser the chances of achieving a consensus on these issues. All right? तो इसलिए जिनको लगता है कि अमेरिका ने हमको सीट दे रहे थे, हमने वापस कर दी, सोवियत यूनियन ने प्रॉमिस किया, हमने वापस कर दी, there is some element of truth to it, कुछ बात हुई होगी. पर ऐसा कहीं है क्या कि हमारे पास कागज आ गया था बस? जैसे कई, वो एक फिल्म है राजकुमार साहब की जो मैं अक्सर देखता हूं, एक सीन के लिए देखता हूं जो मुझे कॉमेडी सीन लगता है, इसलिए मैं उसको देखता हूं, बट सीरियस सीन है कि अस्तीफा तुम अपनी जेब में रख के चलते हैं. तो अस्तीफा रखने से पहले तो बनो तो कलेक्टर, एटीट्यूड डेवलप कर लिया वो. All right, I look it for comic relief. So you should understand that this is a complex task. All right, जैसे आज 4 लोग हमको बना रहे हैं सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल का मेंबर, वैसे कल भी बनाया होगा. 4 लोग बना रहे हैं ना, सपोर्ट कर रहे हैं, एटलीस्ट 4, यूएस, रशिया, फ्रांस, यूके, है ना, बन गए हम. It is a complex task. At that point in time also it was a complex task. So only if you are partisan you will be quick to take a narrow decision on that. In UPSC and in life you will say on the one hand, on the other hand. All right, ये UPSC में हम करते हैं. और अगर कोई सर पे बंदूक भी लगा दे तब तो बहुत सारी चीजें करनी पड़ेंगी. But even under tremendous pressure there is no need to change or take a particular stance. जिससे मैं एग्री नहीं करता, मैं इमीडिएटली किसी ने डांट दिया, मैं कहा कि नहीं नहीं मैं तो आपके साथ हूं जी, right? Which is what happens in politics. Politics is also fashion. The moment substantial number of people start voting for A, you will see that a large number of people would follow the suit. You talk to people on the street, they will always praise the government in power, because people, our people in India are smart, right? They know how to respect power, but they also have removed people from power. Mrs. Indira Gandhi in 1977, all right, Mr. Vajpayee, his government was going to win in 2003-4. So they see, there is a folk logic, there is a formal aspect of it, there is an informal aspect of it. UPSC ki writing mein you don't bring the folk logic always. UPSC requires formal logic, right? Please understand this. There is no problem with folk logic, but bring some reason to it. So thereby, what's the way ahead? Way ahead can only be A, what India is doing, and B, what India should do. And what India should do also flows from what India is doing, right? So understand this. One, India coordinates its position with the G4 countries on this issue. So this is like a coalition of the like-minded pursuing the same task. India, Japan, Germany, and Brazil all are coordinating their position on this issue. So this A needs to continue. B, India needs to work with the P5 countries. All right, India needs to work with the P5 countries. Right? India coordinates its position with G4. It needs to work with P5 countries. To do what? उनसे हमको चाहिए commitment for a concrete timeline. All right? Of course, you engage with them to create a consensus. But what's the most important thing that we would like? Commitment to please commit to a concrete timeline. All right? Working with African countries, Latin American countries to create consensus on the way forward. Consensus on the way forward. All right? So, for example, engaging with L69 group of countries. L69 group of countries. L69 group of countries. Basically, a grouping of least developed and developing countries of Asia, Pacific, Latin America, Caribbean, and Africa. All right. So basically, L69 is a grouping of countries. So you will see in any larger body, just as in a class, in a large class, some people would like to sit together. So these are these groupings when we refer to in the context of UN, L69 group of countries. Unse baat kar rahi hai. And then of course engage with those who do not agree with you also. That's very necessary. Right? Only when you win over those. So anyone who has to win elections, of course, would get their core constituency. All right? They would focus on those who are undecided. Among the undecided, there may be some who may have been earlier opposed to them, but are flexible enough. All right? So engage with countries with different ideas on UN reforms. For example, engage with coffee club countries. All right? You are uniting for consensus countries. जिनसे भी बात कर सकते हैं हम. That is the art of diplomacy. You don't create permanent enemies and permanent friends in diplomacy. That is what the art and science of diplomacy is. All right, no matter what you think about it. So that's the idea. That is what India needs to do. Continue coordinating its position with like-minded countries, G4. Work with countries which are opposed to the idea, uniting for consensus countries. Some of them may be amenable to talks. Work with countries which want the idea but have lack consensus, L69 countries. Work with countries which hold the keys to power, P5 countries, for a commitment to a deadline. All right. With this, we have completed our discussion on the United States. ठीक है? United States के बारे में, UN के बारे में जो हमने बात करनी थी, organization के बारे में, वो हमने कर लिए. With this, the syllabus is over. And I would still say for this part, A, read part B of the printed material. All right. So the standards basics are still the same. All right. And look at the UPSC question to remove your fear. And of course, we will be meeting back again if you have time in the PT 365 program, which would commence soon. Right. So thank you very much for your time and assistance, attention. All the very best wishes. All right. And don't worry about international relations. It generally questions would be easier, right?